guild employee calmly completed the registration, neatly handed the new adventurer a copper token identifier, and sincerely wished him success in this difficult and challenging profession. Meanwhile, Roran, the swordsman who joined the ranks of adventurers at the lowest copper rank, stood stunned. This moment had finally come, although he did not expect it to really happen. Although in his heart he resisted and felt some regret, he could not change anything. Reality left him little choice, especially financially. He was completely out of money and saw no other way to survive. His head was spinning with thoughts about how he ended up at the doors of the Adventurers Guild in this city, so to understand what was happening, he mentally went back a few days and recalled how it all began. From early childhood, his life was closely intertwined with the mercenary squad in which he grew up. All this time he remained in the combat squad, carried out tasks, and fought side by side with comrades. The squad marched alongside warriors, gaining many victories and suffering no fewer defeats. During his service as a mercenary, Roran saw so much in life and gained considerable experience. But even such seemingly time-hardened squads sooner or later fall apart, and now their squad had come to an end. They went into battle, which was supposed to be an easy, pre-won victory, but a treacherous twist of fate turned everything into an unexpected and devastating defeat. He miraculously escaped death in that battle, and having survived, found himself completely cut off from his former comrades. Wandering alone, he eventually came upon the city and found himself in front of the local Adventurers Guild building. He understood well that adventurers were essentially the same wandering mercenaries, just working a little differently. To join the guild, it was enough just to pay the fee. No one dug into your past or asked about your intentions, so anyone could become a traveler, whoever they had been before. Of all his possessions, he had only armor, a huge two-handed sword, and a few silver coins left. He simply did not want to wander aimlessly through streets and roads. Meanwhile, the guild was flooded with many requests to complete various tasks: exterminating monsters, gathering herbs and items, exploring new territories, cleaning, escorting, and this was only a small part. Adventurers had to be jack of all trades, ready to handle the most diverse tasks. He, however, could only take on what his copper rank allowed, and this significantly narrowed his choices. Moreover, he was completely alone, without any support from comrades. Although his combat skills were still sharp, he felt that even the simplest tasks alone became dangerous, and he doubted whether it was worth taking on such a simple job as cleaning ditches at all. At that moment, a man appeared nearby, noticed his thoughts, and asked if he was looking for work, and the interlocutor thought that Roran, though an experienced swordsman, looked confused and unable to decide on a task. He explained that their squad lacked people on the front line, although overall there were enough members. Roran mentally decided that if he were still a mercenary, he would immediately refuse such an offer. He knew well, a mercenary is only a temporarily hired fighter, free in decisions, but at the same time without guarantees, support, or backup in battle, and under such conditions, a lack of reliable cover from the rear could easily cost a life. Therefore, mercenaries are usually too cautious. First, they carefully assess the employer and the environment, and only then decide to cooperate. But sometimes there are exceptions, especially when a fighter has no money at all. The man added that the reward for completing a task in a group would be significantly higher than when working alone, and Roar clarified what exactly the task they would have to perform was. He smiled happily at the shown interest and said that a new member had joined their group, so they planned to complete the task as a party of 5. He suggested introducing all the members, starting with the fact that Rowan would now be with him on the front line. Rowan briefly and politely said he was glad to meet them. Nellen was the first to step forward, a girl who turned out to be the interlocutor's childhood friend and passionately dreamed of becoming a true adventurer. She was a thief and was listed in the guild with a copper rank. Then another appeared, a mage named Okusi, whom they met on the day they registered with the guild and immediately joined him in a group. Okusi was also an adventurer of copper rank. She was explained that she could use magic only 3 times a day. Lauren mentally doubted whether this was really something special. Then the man asked the last member to introduce herself. It turned out that she was a priestess named Lapis, a servant of the god of knowledge, who had just received her appointment and still had little experience. Lapis expressed hope for a successful joint mission, and Roran replied that he intended to cooperate. They also said that they met Lapis immediately after arriving in the city and relied on her divine charms. Lapis herself modestly noted that she could use magic only twice a day, and Roran thought to himself that this no longer sounded so impressive and still left him in doubt. The man who called himself the leader of the group introduced himself as Sif and confidently declared that one day he would be called a hero. He was a copper-rank swordsman and an adventurer. Nellen added with admiration that Sif was the strongest person in the world. Sif asked her not to praise him so much because he was shy and said that he was modest as befits a hero. He was pleased that the newcomer was now beside him and offered to tell about his journey. He recalled how at 6 years old he came across records about a hero in the archives, and this greatly influenced his fate. In his soul, Rorn felt that the group seemed quite balanced, but he noticed with interest. Besides him and Sif, there were only girls. Among the mercenaries, there were almost no women, not because of weakness, but for completely different reasons, so he saw no problem in this. But he had a lingering thought that Sif's story might go on for a long time. Several dozen minutes passed, filled with minor details, and at the end, Sif said that it was then he decided to become a hero. Rowan reminded them that it would be good to finally discuss the mission itself. Nalan intervened, lively stating that the most interesting part was still ahead and that Sif's story should not be interrupted. Rowan thought when there are girls in the group, there can be hidden pitfalls between men and women. He realized that he found himself not only on a potentially dangerous mission, but also in a rather complicated group from a social point of view. Roran, with a businesslike and direct expression on his face, emphasized that they still had not moved on to talk about the mission itself, and in his opinion, this should have been done long ago. He frankly admitted that he had lost his previous job, and now, left without income, wanted to take on real work rather than waste time on empty talk. He said he would consider any proposals that came up, because it was vitally important for him to get to work now. There was no time for unnecessary conversations, and postponing it would be unwise. After that, Sif, a little surprised, agreed with Roran's logic and admitted that since they had found common ground, it was time to move on to the essence of the task. But suddenly, Nalan interrupted the conversation and said that he was not sure whether Roran should be taken into their group. She anxiously reminded him that he was a former mercenary, openly expressed doubts whether it was safe and wise for her to travel alongside a person who would do anything for money, and thinking aloud, feared that his presence might bring problems to the group. Roran mentally noted that such an attitude towards mercenaries was very familiar to him. Society often looks at such fighters through prejudice and distrust. Sif, remaining calm, reminded Nalan that she herself agreed that the group lacked a frontline fighter, and Roran was perfect for this role. Nalang hesitated a little, confirmed that she agreed, but added that maybe it was worth looking for another candidate. OQC, joining the conversation, insisted that in their situation it was extremely unlikely that an adventurer of the required level would join an inexperienced group without a name and merits. The presence of Roran is a plus. Although he was never an adventurer, he has real combat experience, and that is important, so Sif turned to Lapis to hear her opinion about the new member of the team. Lapis thoughtfully said that she did not consider Rowan a bad person and did not distrust him, and Nalong immediately ironically remarked that such her opinion was probably connected with her past in the clergy, where few knew anything about mercenaries. Lapis replied that she really had no opportunity to learn anything detailed about mercenaries in the church, so she judged Lauren by his appearance and behavior. Roran calmly reminded everyone that being in a group was not a permanent obligation, but rather a one-time matter, so temporary inconveniences were quite acceptable. Sif, feeling that objections had subsided, expressed a desire for Roran to officially join the group, and then announced the essence of the upcoming mission to destroy goblins who had settled in the forest near a village 3 days' journey to the east. Nalong explained that the village was called Ain and suggested abandoning the current request and trying to find a more profitable quest there. OQC explained that it could be a request to explore newly discovered ruins, but the guild usually gives such tasks only to those who pass the entrance test or to already experienced groups. Nellen regretfully noted that in such a case their group would always receive only the cheapest and least paid jobs. CIFE, without losing confidence, said that they would take on available tasks and show good results, after which the guild would offer them more serious missions. Roran, hearing this, instantly asked how many goblins were in the forest and how large their gang was. He admitted that there is no exact data. The peasants, encountering goblins during hunting, immediately fled, and he added that it does not matter how many goblins are in the forest in his opinion, such enemies do not pose a serious threat. Safe summed up the conversation. If there are no more questions, the group sets off tomorrow. Roran wanted to make sure of this, but Safe had already decisively ordered preparations for the journey and insisted that they gather near the eastern gate the next morning. Roran mentally estimated that they needed to stock up on food for 3 days and find a place to spend the night, but there was not enough money for medicine. The next day he came to the eastern gate earlier than the others and noticed that none of his companions were there yet. One of the guards, noticing him, behaved as if he had already seen him and as if he was involved in local affairs. Roran simply replied that he was just waiting for his companions because they needed to leave early in the morning. The guard felt that he could no longer fall asleep and was tired of standing in place he had been on duty since dawn. Noticing Roran's fatigue, he asked if he had managed to rest well, and Roran admitted that he had not rested fully. The guard sighed sadly, saying the day would be hard, suggested chatting a bit to somehow dispel the heaviness he himself was bored, and also asked if Roran was in this city for the first time, calling it a cafe. Roran, hearing this, asked if the city was really called that, and the guard was confused and surprised. He was amazed that Roran ended up here without even knowing the city's name. Roran replied that certain events had simply happened to him that suddenly brought him here. The guard took this with understanding and added that although Kofi was not the capital, it was a very pleasant, warm city with delicious food and good people. He called Kofi his hometown and asked where Roran had spent the night before. He pointed to the building on the right at the corner. The guard smiled and said that it was an old but reliable place where they really cooked deliciously, and suggested going there together after work, and Roran replayed his words in his head. He noticed that he had never had a hometown. All his life he wandered from one battlefield to another, so he could not even imagine what it was like to stay in one place and call it his own, and it seemed to him that maybe it was for the better. Meanwhile, Sif approached the gate and noticed that Roran was already there. The guard asked if they were companions. Roran explained that these people were his companions only for one task. The guard honestly admitted that he did not expect much from the group, whose leader was surrounded only by girls, hinting at some hidden motives. Roran smiled quietly. There was more envy than sense in those words, but overall he agreed with it. Sifask asked how long he had been waiting. Roran replied that everyone was already gathered, so they could set off. The road to the village would take 3 days. Sif suggested finding a cart to get there faster. Roran shuddered inwardly. All his training was for a hiking trip, and now, having no money, he would have to run after the cart. He pondered at what speed he would have to run not to fall behind. Lapis approached him and compassionately handed over 10 copper coins, saying that it would be enough for the trip to the village and back. She assured him that there was no reason to doubt it was simply a debt, and hopefully, she added, maybe someday he could help her too. She called it an investment in the future. Sif reported that they managed to arrange a carriage with a coachman who would take them directly to the village of Ian for 5 coins. Lapis confirmed that she was ready to set off. Thank you, Voran, he thought again, and realized to himself that he had unexpectedly become indebted and felt that nothing good would come of it. Safe-side with relief and gratitude, they managed to find transport and reach the place, because without it they would have to spend energy and time on an exhausting journey on foot. Noan said with relief that they were incredibly lucky. With the ride, walking would have been a waste of strength and precious time. The driver smiled, waved his hand, and added that he himself was returning home lightly, having just sold all his grain. As soon as he learned that this was the same group of adventurers who were supposed to tame the goblins settled near his village, he became interested, and having confirmed this, promised to take them there as soon as possible, not wanting to delay, because the peace of his native land depended on it. Es politely thanked him for the help. Roran mentally noted that the reward for the trip might be symbolic. The coachman was still returning empty-handed. Nalan assured them that they would handle the goblins and asked not to worry about the outcome. Warren sought to articulate the group's action plan, but it was clear that the surroundings perceived his initiative as unnecessary, so the conversation in this vein seemed futile. Kucher said they would stop here for the night, and at dawn they would move on to be in the village by noon. After explaining everything, he wished everyone good night and went to rest. Sif also announced that before the journey, the group needed to rest. Nalan, rubbing her lower back, complained about fatigue and noted that riding in the cart was extremely uncomfortable. Sif agreed with her and reminded that they too would be on watch at night. Roran heard this with surprise and could not understand how 2 from the group would not sleep all night. C explained that the watch would be in turns, because it is hard to stay awake until morning without a break. Roran again clearly explained why there was only one on watch. Logically, guards should stand in pairs, especially when they were simply outdoors, outside walls or fortifications. He silently resented. Mercenaries and soldiers usually behaved exactly like that in groups or pairs, especially at night when danger could sneak from any side. In his opinion, when the group slept in the open air, it would be wiser if every member participated in the night watch. Nalan sharply said that since the leader had already decided, there was no point in discussing it further. Roran agreed without unnecessary words and clarified that if he and Sif were to watch, they needed to decide who would go first. Sif evidently was completely exhausted and asked Roran to take his post first, because he himself wanted to lie down earlier to rest, and Roran nodded and promised to wake him in the middle of the night when it was time to change. Late at night, sitting by the fire and staring into the darkness, Roran caught quiet, muffled voices coming from the tent. He felt that the shift would last longer than expected. Those who were sleeping clearly did not intend to get up, and the memory of the previous sleepless night was still fresh, because after the loss of the detachment, he could not relax. Earlier he always slept among comrades, and their presence gave him peace. Now he felt loneliness and anxiety, remembered his battle friends and hoped they were alive, and deep in his heart believed that, despite the slim chances, fate would one day bring them together again. At that moment, Lapis appeared beside him. She approached silently, which slightly frightened him, and immediately apologized, saying she had no intention to scare him at all. She admitted that she would not be able to sleep in the tent next to him, so she decided to sit by him for a while. Roran ironically acknowledged that this was a real problem, insomnia before the mission. Lapis said sadly that she was not sure if she could sleep until it was over. She asked if she could sit with him a little longer. Lauren wondered if this happened often, because he believed that even those who work at night must maintain discipline. He added that, of course, he understands the urgency, especially when a person does not know if they will live until tomorrow. Lapis smiled and admitted that she would like to say that such things happen rarely, but in reality, everything is quite different. This happened constantly, and those who arranged it remained surprisingly cheerful. She regretted that these people chose neither the right time nor the appropriate place to indulge their desires. She said outright that according to her teaching, God commanded to be fruitful and multiply, so strictly speaking, they acted according to God's commandments, and Roran, hearing this, was stunned by her frankness in his view. Priests and priestesses had to be much more restrained in such matters. He asked her which god she served, for he knew there were many gods. Lapis replied that her god was Cucula, the god of knowledge, and that gods, unlike people, cannot be easily explained. She persistently urged him to perceive them as pillar symbols of higher ideas, not as living beings. She added that she herself did not feel fear, but warned that her views might not please others, so she advised him to be cautious. Rowan thanked her for the warning, and sincerely admitted that as a mercenary he had no formal education, so he might not be very knowledgeable in theology, and Lapis asked why he decided to become an adventurer. Roran, without hesitation, calmly and simply said that his squad no longer exists. Lapis was a little embarrassed and apologized, as if she felt she had touched something personal. Roran gently replied that nothing terrible had happened for him, it was a usual thing. He calmly explained that in a warrior's life there are both victories and defeats, and unfortunately, this time his detachment was simply unlucky were defeated. He admitted that he could have tried to join another detachment and continue his old life, but it so happened that he ended up far from the battlefield, fled, and was left alone. Moreover, after arriving in the city, he had nowhere to go, so joining the Adventurers Guild became the only way to earn money. Lapis, upon hearing this, enthusiastically remarked that he must be truly strong. She placed the sword at her waist and, not hiding her surprise, admitted that she was impressed by its enormous size. Roran calmly explained that it was a two-handed weapon, but it was not always possible to hold it with both hands. He trained to wield the sword with both his right and left hand and even suggested comparing sizes. Lapis agreed with interest. He asked if she was sure, and she, a bit coquettishly, asked if she was really thinner. Rowan mentally confirmed. Undoubtedly, she was indeed thinner than his sword. To her next surprised comment, he calmly replied that the sword was definitely bigger. Lapis admitted a little embarrassed that it was obvious anyway. Roran noticed that it was already getting lighter. Lapis agreed they were so engrossed in conversation that they did not notice how quickly time flew, and Roran apologized for making her spend the whole night with him. He added that for a mercenary, night watches were a usual thing, and for a priestess it was probably boring. Lapis, on the contrary, said that she found it very interesting to talk with him. Roran, nodding, suggested starting preparations for departure, and Lapis agreed, supporting his proposal. Meanwhile, Seafolk Upend, realizing it was already light, wondered in surprise why he was not woken up for the guard shift, and Roran calmly replied that everything went well and there was no need to worry. The coachman announced that everyone was already awake and would have breakfast soon. They would leave immediately. He added that the village was not far at all. Roran thought as soon as this matter was over, he would have to find another way to support himself. Soon the driver shouted that they had arrived and pointed to the village of Ian. Looking around the surroundings, Lapis noticed that the village was surrounded by a rather dense forest, and Saif guessed that it was from there that the goblins who now threatened the locals came. Roran mentally decided to first interrogate the witnesses to narrow the search and not waste time, but Cephas insisted, "Let's go into the forest immediately, without any stops." Roran stopped him and, pointing out that before going into battle some important steps needed to be taken, reminded that this was a mission from the village, so logically it was best to first visit the elder to better understand the situation. He considered it quite natural to first find out how many enemies there were and where they were approximately located to make a plan, and starting the matter without even meeting the one who hired them seemed strange and unreasonable to him. Nalan, clearly irritated by his excessive seriousness, sharply said that the task was simple: the goblins had to be destroyed, and there was no point in wasting time on any ceremonies, because even the coachman could have just informed about their arrival. She wondered how much time they would need to cope with such a seemingly simple task. Roran shook his head. It is precisely such words that underestimate the work itself. He recalled that even his former commander, although mercenaries treated him disdainfully, always considered meeting with the client a usual and obligatory part of any business. The coachman jumped into the conversation and, to avoid sparking a quarrel, said he would talk to the village elder himself, and the group only had to destroy the goblins. Sif took command and clearly explained the formation. He would go ahead, Nalon would stand in the center and cover the mage's Lapis and accuracy, and Roran would be last and watch the rear. He earnestly asked everyone to finish the task, and the villagers finally sighed with relief after these words. He led the group into the forest. Nylon, looking at Lauren, said that they would manage somehow even without those always tense mercenaries. Akusi, a bit irritated, muttered that in battle someone must be the shield, and this role is indispensable. Lapis kindly added that if someone got wounded, she would use healing magic. Lun immediately hurried to clarify, magic can only be used if the wounded is Sif himself. Rowan mentally noted that they went into the forest without any information about the goblins. He realized that now they would have to wander the forest blindly, wasting time and strength. As they walked through the forest, Nalan noticed bushes with berries and joyfully exclaimed that it was raspberries, and Sif enthusiastically suggested gathering some. They hadn't eaten fresh berries for a long time. Akusi noticed that donkey grass grows here, which can be used as material for magic. Lapis persistently reminded everyone of the main task to exterminate the goblins and urged them to focus, while Roran mentally noted that everyone was busy with their own affairs and no one was advancing toward the goal, so if this continued, the goblins would find them themselves. Lapis ironically remarked that Roran seemed to have already given up. He calmly asked if she hadn't given up yet. Lapis admitted that she felt awkward in this situation. Roran dryly noted that she would have to manage. She in turn admitted that she felt awkward when he addressed her informally. Roran tried to address her as Lady Lapis. She said that Lapis was fine, and asked in surprise why he sounded so uncertain. Roran admitted that he had never addressed a girl by her name before, and suggested that she also call him Roran. In response, Lapis decided to continue calling him Mr. Rowan, and immediately hurried to clarify that she did not mean to create distance between them at all. Rowan replied reservedly that she would address him in whichever way was most convenient for her, and Lapis confirmed with a slight smile that she would continue calling him as she was used to. At that moment, Roran noticed something unusual. No one stopped abruptly, but someone reported that she heard a sound in the forest. Roran mentally noted that someone was indeed approaching them, and the feeling grew stronger. Sif turned to Nalon and said anxiously that if someone was nearby, it could be monsters, and Nalon replied that she was not sure what was approaching, but the sound was clear and definitely not accidental. In the next second, everything escalated. OQC was wounded, and this became the signal for a sudden attack. Goblins rushed at them. Everything happened lightning fast, and Roran indignantly noticed that the group members turned away from the enemy at the worst possible moment. Lapis, trying to protect our group, suggested casting a protective spell, but we decisively stopped her, deciding that it was inappropriate at the moment. He instantly assessed the situation and noticed where the arrow had come from. The place turned out to be extremely inconvenient for close combat. He bitterly regretted not having at least a short sword, yet still stabbed a dagger into one of the enemies, but the wound turned out to be only superficial. He mentally noted that the strike was not deep enough. Sif roared with rage. The goblins took advantage of the moment to retreat and seemed to be preparing to flee, so he ordered an immediate pursuit, considering it a chance to reach their lair. Roar mentally noticed again that no one was interested in his thought, although he still tried to express doubt. He believed that mindless pursuit could be dangerous and futile. Sif vehemently objected that their task was to exterminate the goblins, and now that they finally had a lead, they must see it through to the end, otherwise the mission would be in vain. Nalan took his side, reproaching Roran for excessive caution and reminding him that if the leader makes a decision, it should be listened to, not judged. Roran, despite inner resistance, mentally noted that the mission itself did not imply destroying the goblin lair. Meanwhile, the group moved forward, and Roran and Lapis lagged behind. Lapis noticed that although Sif went ahead with Okusi, she felt calmer staying near Roran. Priests and mages needed to be protected in battle. He asked her if she was confident in her decision, and she decisively confirmed that she was ready. Roran noticed fresh, noticeable traces of goblin blood on the ground. Now, tracking the enemies became much easier. Roran approached Lapis, wanting to hear her opinion about their group's combat capability, and primarily to find out how strong Sif was as a swordsman. He reminded that goblins reproduce quickly and pose a threat by numbers, though individually weak, and insisted that if they cannot be defeated immediately, a clear strategy is needed. He noticed that the group acted chaotically, and slowly this inspired no confidence in success. He added that in such a situation one can rely only on the strength of the swordsman, and he wanted to find out how truly strong Sif was in this role. Lapis replied that as a former mercenary, he had surely heard of a fighter nicknamed Demonic Swordsman, a legendary figure known to many. Roran confirmed that he had heard this name. He remembered that enemies who faced this swordsman were doomed to death, and his allies always emerged victorious. No one wanted to see such a warrior against them on the battlefield. He asked if Lapis really believed that Sif could compete with such a hero. Lapis chuckled. Even 10 million Sifs would not be enough to defeat the one called the Demonic Swordsman. Roran sharply remarked that such confidence could border on madness. Lapis, with a barely noticeable smile, noted that he himself was now in the same situation, and realizing her words, sighed and admitted that perhaps he was behaving like a madman. He had no money, and wherever he turned, he would have to go into debt. With light irony from Lapis, it was said that he could only sympathize. Roran was surprised by her intonation, and mentally noted that it was strange to hear sympathy in the form of a statement said as a question. Sif said that they had come across a cave, possibly the very lair of the goblins. He showed that the bloody tracks led straight inside, and added that even Nalon confirmed they were moving in the right direction. Roran felt that the cave was too cramped, and it would be very difficult to swing his large sword there, so he doubted whether it was worth entering. The weapon there was almost useless. Nellon irritably replied that if he doubted whether he could return, then he should not count on his share of the reward, and Sif tried to calm him down, saying that goblins were not such serious enemies and everything would be fine. He handed Roran the weapon he had picked up on the way, thinking it might come in handy. Roran took it, mentally acknowledging that this was better than nothing. Sif gave the order. Ocusi was to illuminate the path ahead with magic, and Nalon was to inspect the surroundings for traps or other dangers. If nothing suspicious was found, they were to enter the cave. Ocusi instantly uttered a magical spell and summoned the charms of light to cast a glow into the dark depths ahead. Ro mentally wondered how one could spend limited and valuable magical energy on such a simple thing as lighting the way. Why they had not at least brought a simple torture lamp, it would have been much simpler and more effective, and what was even in their baggage. Nellon finished the inspection and reported that he found no traps or pitfalls. Sif suggested that there might be kidnapped people inside, so they needed to hurry immediately and rescue them. Rohan thought that Sif was too confident. The risk of an ambush inside was still great, and traps could very well have gone unnoticed. Confident in safety, he ordered to move on without hesitation. He thought that the goblins fled in haste and did not even leave guards at the entrance, and considered this a stroke of luck. Atsushi added that goblins are primitive creatures, and if wounded, they are unlikely to think about guarding. Roran again wondered if they were moving too quickly forward, hardly analyzing the situation. Lapis, who was walking nearby, asked him to share her thoughts about what was happening. He said that precisely because there were no guards at the entrance, it clearly smelled like a trap. Lapis asked if goblins could be so cunning to arrange such a thing, and Roran replied that he personally did not know goblins, but even primates set someone on guard to watch around, so he definitely did not consider goblins dumber than monkeys. Lapis began to think aloud, wondering what the difference was between the minds of monkeys and goblins. She recalled that monkeys can unite into communities and even use simple tools, so they are not so far from humans. Roran mentally noted that somehow these reflections interested her now, probably because she is a priestess of the god of knowledge. Lapis noticed that he was lost in thought and asked if everything was all right. At that moment, Sif said that there was a room ahead where he noticed light. Ravrin mentally remarked, if they see light from that room, then the enemy will just as easily notice them. Nalon suggested that it might be a goblin ambush, and Okusi added that in that case the real trouble would be if there were archers inside. Nalon and Okusi were supposed to follow. Roran shook his head again. Walking straight into a trap was reckless. Such courage caused both admiration and anxiety, because such a decision was practically suicidal. Especially considering that one of the 3 possible spells per day had already been spent on a direct strike, Akuse still cast a protective spell, trying to somehow reduce the risk. Sif thanked her and said he relied on her magic. Lapis turned to Lauren, hoping that this would be enough. He answered evasively, saying it was hard to predict. Lapis asked what he would do in a similar situation. Lauren, without hesitation, frankly said that in his place he would block the cave entrance with fresh branches and dry grass, then set everything on fire. The exit would be blocked by fire. Heat and smoke would rush inside, and this would be the simplest and most effective way to deal with an ambush. Lapis pointed out that this method requires oil. Roaring agreed. Without oil and flint from raw wood, fire is almost impossible to ignite, and since they didn't even have such simple things, all that was left was to resign themselves and perhaps retreat. He sighed quietly to himself, understanding how hard it is when you don't have money even for the simplest equipment. Lapis nodded briefly, showing that he understood. Sif announced that he would go inside together with Roran. Roran, calm, reminded that he had no protective magic on him. Okusi noted that he had a huge sword and could quite serve as a shield. Nalan agreed. Roran mentally realized that in such a narrow cave, even drawing a sword would be extremely difficult, and using it as a shield considering its weight and size would only hinder himself. Sif apologized and explained that he could not cast a second protective spell because he already had one on him. Roran calmly replied that it was just bad luck, and he mentally decided that from now on he would have to survive on his own, under any circumstances. Sif enthusiastically shouted the command, "Forward," and Roran thought that with such a loud announcement, they definitely alerted all the enemies in the area. He remarked to Riley that apparently this was a plan to announce their arrival in advance. He also admitted that magic is really convenient. It did not deflect arrows, but allowed them to bounce off the body. Filled with fighting spirit, Sif shouted that he would now deal with all the enemies, but he did not manage to finish his report. He stumbled and fell with a loud crash. Nalan instantly rushed forward to help him. Lapis also wanted to rush to him, but Roran stopped her in time. Nalan persistently called Sif, asking him to get up. Lapis noticed depressions in the ground, possibly a trap, and Roran tensely said that they needed to be especially careful because there was clearly someone in this cave who could think and set ambushes. Safe, with shining eyes, held a worn but clearly beloved book in his hands and said with excitement in his voice that the hero in it was simply incredible. He was sure that before him was a true example to follow, a real hero worthy of admiration and respect. Safe dreamed of becoming a man like him to travel the world, perform brave deeds, and someday earn the right to be called a hero, and he firmly promised himself to become a traveler who would be honored as a hero. But in reality, everything was far from romantic. Nalan burst out screaming in pain and rage when they were attacked, and the goblins suddenly broke out of the ambush and rushed into the attack. Saif was in shock, barely realizing what was happening. Only one thought was spinning in his head. This could not have happened. They were just goblins, not a demon army, and he could not believe that things had gone so far. Roran watched closely and immediately noticed. One of the goblins clearly stood out. He was noticeably bigger and more formidable, so Roran thought that this was probably their leader, possibly a higher form. Lapis then explained that among goblins, special goblins are sometimes born. They can start as ordinary ones, but over time, gaining experience and strength, they change and become much more dangerous. She immediately noticed. This goblin was holding a staff and dressed differently, so most likely a goblin mage, one of the most dangerous representatives of the higher forms, because such an opponent possesses magic and knowledge that make him deadly dangerous. Rohan coldly understood that fighting such an enemy without preparation was too reckless, better not to approach at all, but everything was already out of control because Saif and the rest of the group were already drawn into the fight. Roran sharply looked back, noticing movement behind. Enemies were sneaking up from the rear, and he realized retreat was already impossible. Okyusi decisively cast a spell of shifting sand to put her enemies to sleep. But at that very moment, the goblin mage also cast a spell, and a blinding flash of light exploded. Roran tried to understand what kind of magic it was, watching Lapis fall to her knees. She was weak. He approached her, and anxiously asked if she could no longer move and what exactly had happened to her, and Roran realized that she had almost completely lost her strength. Okyusi screamed in panic that her spell had somehow failed. No one fell asleep despite the magic. She begged the enemies not to come closer, and Saif, trying to protect his own, rushed forward with a scream and ordered the goblins not to touch the girls. But his defense did not work. He was wounded right in the fight. In his head, a desperate thought did not subside. This cannot be. I was supposed to be a hero. The Okyusi grabbed her. She desperately screamed for help, but it was already too late. Roran felt hopeless. It was impossible to save them. The escape route was blocked. He turned to Lapis, seeing that she was lying there exhausted, and asked if she really could no longer move, if she had no strength left at all. A troubling thought flashed in his mind. The enemy surrounded them on both sides, and soon they would be completely encircled. Lapis, barely raising her eyes to him, asked him to leave her. She considered herself a burden, and said that he could still get out on his own. Roran, hearing her cold and resigned words, mentally noted that she spoke about herself strangely calmly, almost detached. Lapis bitterly said, women, most likely, would not be killed immediately, but their enemies would mercilessly destroy the men, so she insisted that he go without her. Roran sharply told her to shut up, and added that she would bite her tongue if she continued to say such things. He remembered how not long ago she herself said that her place was beside him, that she wanted to be close because she considered it right, and that she had lent him money hoping that someday he could help her. He quietly whispered to her to wait, warning that they would soon be shaken. The decision was made. He could no longer wait, grabbed Lapis and rushed forward, ignoring the arrows flying after them. He realized that the way back was closed for them. The only way was forward. Manichau Hamagahau Yuen Mirohaf. He noticed that behind the goblin mage there was a narrow passage, and only through it could they slip. The goblin sorcerer did not stay aside. He released fireballs, aiming at the one who was running. Roran realized that there was not enough time. He rushed forward and with one fierce jerk cut off the goblin's head, getting rid of the main threat. Rory knew that getting out was a real miracle, but that did not mean the fight was over. It was unknown when they would be chased, so their only chance to survive was to run as fast as possible. But with every step he felt more and more that they were moving away from the exit, and he hesitated whether it was good after all. They were delving deeper and deeper into dangerous, unknown caves. The only hope that echoed in his mind was that somewhere ahead there was a detour, but for now he saw only complete darkness, and sadly thought that the debt he once got into turned out to be damn expensive. Lapis, though exhausted and tense, noticed that Roran moved strangely deftly and quickly in complete darkness, as if it was not a new environment for him but a familiar one. Roran abruptly interrupted her and ordered her to be silent because her voice distracted and prevented him from concentrating. Lapis responded indignantly, comparing herself to a sack being dragged, and declared that she was tired of such treatment. Lauren, however, without losing his composure, retorted that it was hard for him too, he was the one carrying her, not the other way around, and added that if she really wanted to survive, she better keep quiet. Lapis agreed and promised not to interfere anymore, but then, softening her voice, said that she deserved at least a little better treatment, explained that she was not asking to be treated like a princess, but also did not want to be treated like a shapeless burden. Roran lifted her onto his back, and feeling the change, she sincerely thanked him for the rescue, and Roran mentally noted that her voice had returned to normal. Lapis finally asked the question that had long troubled her. Why did he save her when he abandoned the others? Roran did not think any longer, calmly said it was his choice. He just wanted to, because she was lucky, and because he owed her money. He asked her to choose any of these reasons, saying any could be correct. Lapis disagreed, and added that maybe he did it simply out of kindness, to which Roran replied that if that were the case, he would not have abandoned the others. Lapis firmly stated that no matter what happened, she was the one he saved and would consider it an act of kindness, while Roran dismissed the conversation, allowing her to believe in what was closer to her heart. He changed the subject and returned again to the strange moments of the fight. One question tormented him: why her speech suddenly changed and why she stopped moving. Lapis understood that there was no point in hiding it further and confessed. Since he had already seen it, he would tell everything, and she began by asking if he knew what demons were. Roran replied that he knew about their existence and explained. Besides humans, different races live in the world, in particular, half-beasts and demons, who are usually feared because they have developed bodies, possess magic, and are almost not interested in other races. They communicate with others only for their own benefit, have a bad reputation, and are rare among humans. Their mentality is completely different, and even in his mercenary squad, it was believed that it is better not to get involved with demons. The church brands them as apostates. They do not believe in the supreme God, and for it, they are an abomination. A demon is revealed by bright purple eyes. There is also a legendary figure, the Lord of Demons, before whom the whole world trembles, although he does not seek conquests. Lapis calmly said that she was a demon, but Lauren did not believe it at first. He recalled that she was a priestess and did not look like a demon at all because her eyes were not purple. Lapis explained that she did not believe in the supreme god or mother goddess, as humans do. Demons usually honor the god of knowledge. He teaches to strive for discoveries and knowledge, and for demons, knowledge itself is sacred, especially magic. She said that she could use both divine spells and ordinary magic. Other gods are not capable of that. Usually, when you serve one god, you are limited in the choice of means. Roran finally realized where her unusual power came from. This explained the light spells he had seen in her earlier. It turned out that she was both a mage and a priestess at the same time. He asked if human priests of the god of knowledge could also create magic. Lapis replied that maybe someone could, but it was unlikely to find a person equal to her in abilities after all. She was a demon, and her powers were higher than human ones from birth. Ruin mentally confirmed that if it were possible to combine both magic and divine spells, everyone would become priests of this god. He then asked why she, a demon, decided to become an adventurer, since, as he heard, demons almost do not contact other races and live in inaccessible mountains in the middle of the continent. Lapis replied that this was a mistaken opinion. In fact, many demons live among humans. They just skillfully disguise themselves, behave cautiously, and do not show all their power. Humans generally do not notice them. Roran asked if they really deliberately restrain their abilities. Lapis confirmed and said that this explained her current condition. She added that her body was not quite normal. Lauren noticed that he could move his hand again. Lapis explained that her limbs and even eyes were delicate magical instruments controlled by mana, and every movement required a lot of energy. She reminded him that he himself saw how OQC failed to activate magic, most likely due to the managering effect imposed by the goblin mage. This effect is too complex for a simple goblin most likely. He did not cast the spell personally, but used some magical item. Roaring took out the medallion and showed it, suggesting that it might have been the tool the goblin used. Lapis looked closely at the pendant and guessed that it was probably the very device. She did not know how the goblin could have obtained such an artifact, but noted that, fortunately, it would not be used constantly. She would need more time to fully restore her movements, but at least she retained control over her eyes. Roran understood why she had earlier asked him to get rid of that thing, but since the device was turned off and inactive, for now he could leave it. He asked what happened to her speech and why it suddenly changed. Lapis explained that the strange manner of speaking was not a local dialect, it was her natural way of speaking. The magical energy was exhausted, and she could not move either her hands or feet. When she found herself in a critical situation, her consciousness instinctively switched to combat mode. She explained that her words and actions changed depending on her psychological state in peaceful times and in battle. Roran accepted this information and said he understood everything, but again noted that the strangeness around her was only increasing. Lapis returned to the topic of the recent quarrel and admitted that when she asked him to leave her, it was the best and most logical decision, and she also thanked him for not listening to her words and continuing to carry her despite everything. She added that although demons have a bad reputation, they do not forget good deeds. Goran simply nodded and said that she could repay later. Meanwhile, they needed to find a way out of these cursed caves, and he added that he still had a feeling that something was wrong with this cave. Lapis agreed and said that they had probably moved far from the place where the goblins first attacked them, but ahead there was still no end in sight. Her initial belief that goblins lived in a natural cave turned out to be false. This place was clearly something else. Roran confirmed her words, and he mentally noted. Along the way they encountered many rooms, clearly goblin ones if these were the same places. In the worst case, they could be stuck in these corridors forever. He hoped that they would reach the end and find the way back, but the very appearance of the corridors said otherwise. They were too monotonous and even, as if someone had deliberately shaped them that way. Roran suggested they turn back. Lapis reminded them that if they did so, they would have to go through that dangerous room again. Roran quietly remarked that it would be better if there was an exit on the other side. Lapis replied that if they really found an exit, Rohan would be a very lucky man. Rohan did not rely on luck and told her not to count too much on his fortune. Lapis admitted in response that she herself was unlikely to live up to his expectations. She confessed that when she left her homeland, the lands of demons, her parents replaced her real limbs and eyes with artificial ones, so she could blend in with humans, become an adventurer, and join the group. Lauren, hearing this, said that she was probably even less lucky than him. Lapis agreed that she was only lucky in that she was surrounded by frivolous and inattentive people who could not understand who she really was. Lauren advised her not to continue if it was hard for her, but she continued anyway, saying that her real hands, legs, and eyes were hidden somewhere in the human lands. Her goal was to study the human world, and she would not return home until she found her lost parts. Roaring cut in, saying he was not going to hold a contest for the title of the most unfortunate. Lapis added that if she managed to return the lost body parts, she could connect them and become whole again. Roran advised her to return to her homeland and ask her parents directly about everything. At that moment, Lapis noticed a dead end ahead and pointed to it. Roran confidently said that in a real dead end there is no light, and Lapis guessed that it might be the light at the end of the tunnel, but she did not rule out that goblins might be lurking ahead again. Roran reported that he saw no sign of goblins, told her to dim the magical lights, and asked if she could stand up. Lapis apologized and admitted that she really was causing trouble. Roran said it was all right, but if serious danger arose he would have to drop her, so he asked her to be ready for that. Lapis agreed, realizing that in battle she might not even let him draw his weapon. Roran very much hoped that they would not have to fight. He found himself in a dead end, but faint light was breaking through a crack in the wall. Lapis said she could crawl there on all fours, but immediately admitted, her hands and feet barely obey, and she would not dare to go into the unknown alone. Roar looked and wondered if she would get stuck but first in that crack. He suggested demolishing the wall and widening the passage, saying it would have to be noisy, and asked Lapis to watch if anyone was approaching. Lapis promised to be careful. Roan again seized the thought. Would he finish the task before the pursuer appeared? He examined the wall, estimated its strength, and decided he could handle it. Soon he widened the passage enough to crawl through it. Lapis praised him. Although everything took time, he did wonderfully. Roran said the main thing was that no one caught up with them, ordered to go first, then pull her after him, and apologized for the inconvenience. Lapis replied that it was all right because they were in the same boat. Roran, though feeling tired, still gathered strength and moved forward. He asked what she had seen after all. It was important for him to hear her opinion. Lapis, looking around the walls with interest, sincerely admired that they were made of an incredible material, a building compound created from mana, and Roran, pointing to the strange glow, clarified what exactly it was about. Lapis explained that it was a special building material used by an ancient civilization. The process of its manufacture is still unknown, but it is known that it absorbs mana directly from the air and transforms it into light. Roran, hearing about the ancient civilization, froze and ran through the meaning of these words in his head. Lapis told more details. Long ago, there was a state that reached incredible prosperity, distinguished by an incredible level of magic. Its inhabitants mastered sorcery and ruled over most of the world. They say that back then not only humans lived there, half-bloods, beast people, demons, all races coexisted, and from the ruins it is visible. Almost all the influential people of that civilization were mages. Their cities rose into the air and literally hung above the ground. But one day that country disappeared, its people scattered all over the world, and perhaps founded new states in different corners of the globe. Roran concluded, if these are really the ruins of an ancient civilization, everything here could be worth a fortune, and Lap was sure that sooner or later the place would be plundered by the Adventurers Guild or ordinary treasure hunters. Roran sadly noted that it did not look very promising. Lapis looked around and suggested scraping some material from the wall. Although the light from it was weak, it could still be useful as a source. Moreover, it was a very valuable object for research. Roran noticed that fragments were already lying on the floor and pointed to them. Lapis enthusiastically approved the find, emphasizing that one of the shards was truly magnificent. We understood again, if they were really inside the ruins of an ancient civilization, then this did not bode well at all. Lapis asked him why he thought so. She said that such places could be described in one word, contradictory. Roran asked if she could stand up yet. Lapis replied that she could not yet. She explained that, as he said earlier, such places were indeed dangerous, but at the same time there were completely safe corners without traps or threats. Roran added that the most impressive of all the ruins he knew was a room resembling a toilet. Everything there was top-notch, a sewage purification system, no smell, no security mechanisms or magical traps. Lapis giggled funny, he thought, that in such a remote place no one cared about protection, even though it was vulnerable. Roran agreed indeed, no one thought about it. Lapis concluded that maybe these ruins were not so dangerous, and in general, there were far fewer truly dangerous places here. Roran mentally wondered what kind of ruins these were, and the same thought was spinning in Lapis's head. He said he hoped it was safe here, but warned Lapis to be alert, just like him. Lapis promised to be on guard to catch any magical signals and notice traps. In return, she asked him to fend off attacks if enemies appeared, and Roran with a slight smile pointed to his sword and said that this was exactly what the weapon was for. In the worst case, they could return the same way through the hole in the goblin cave. He did not consider them such a threat, and of course, it would be best to avoid a fight and calmly get to the surface. Lapis was not sure everything would go smoothly, and Roran agreed, saying that he actually did not believe in God and was not eager to take communion. Then he firmly gripped the sword hilt and listened carefully. Lapis shuddered inside. His sharp gesture scared her. She called him, asking what had happened. Roran, listening tensely, said that someone was approaching. Lapis assessed her strength, assumed she could stop the invaders with magic, and asked him to give her a signal at the right moment. A whisper sounded from the side. People were discussing someone ahead, a suspicious man with a girl on his back, wondering how they ended up in unknown ruins, and someone whispered that it might be an illusion. But another immediately objected. They radiated warmth, so they were real, and in his opinion, this was definitely not a place for a walk. Suddenly, 4 people appeared before Roran and Lapis, and Roran immediately noticed. Silver tokens hung on their chests. They were silver rank adventurers. The first man, with a slight smile, said that if they had escaped from goblins and now got lost in the ruins, it was at least very unlucky. The second in the group added that if their squad had died, and these 2 survived, then luck had indeed smiled upon them. At that moment, one of the girls in their group grabbed the first man by the ear. He howled loudly, shouted her name, Nim, and begged her not to pull so hard, as she might tear off his ear. Nim calmly replied that if he was not going to obey, then he did not need those ears. In the dusty half-darkness of the ancient ruins, 4 new adventurers appeared before Roran and Lapis. Chuck, a formidable fighter and silver adventurer. Nim, an archer with a sharp tongue and no less sharp gaze, also silver rank. Ritz, a reserved swordsman with the posture of a commander. And finally Colts, an elder mage in worn but neat clothes. Colts, noticing that Roran was staring at Nim, smiled mockingly and asked if it was the first time he had seen an elf. Roran was embarrassed and admitted that it was, apologizing for his rudeness because he realized that staring like that was impolite. Colts jokingly said that such attention was understandable, she was a real beauty, but Nim did not appreciate the mage's comment and threatened that if he did not stop, she might be left without eyes. Colts, smiling, admitted that despite his age, he did not want to lose his sight at all. Nim, with steel calmness, said that this time one eye would be enough for her. Ritz, tired of their verbal quarrels, asked everyone to calm down, saying they were too troublesome. He immediately got down to business. They understood Roran and Lapis' situation and under other circumstances would have led them to the exit, but now they were busy with their mission. Added Nim, their task was to scout the ruins near the village of Ain, and he asked if they had heard about them. Rowan recalled how Milan had spoken about this mission, the one they had neglected in search of something more profitable, and suddenly realized fate had led them here to these newly discovered ruins that could be dangerous. Chuck noticed that such unexplored ruins often hide danger, but also pay well. Their group tried to be the first to complete this task, but soon they had to compete with other adventurers. The Colts explained that there was an unspoken competition between them and their rivals. Whoever brings more useful results to the guild will receive a greater reward, so no one can afford to waste time. Roran assured them that he did not intend to interfere with their work, and asked only one thing to indicate which way one could exit the ruins, and Ritz could not answer immediately, admitting that they themselves did not yet know the exact path. Roran said restrainedly that it was truly bad luck. Ritz quickly noted that they had not lost their heads and had been recording the route all along. He growled and laughed to himself. Did he really look like he thought they had failed? He turned to Lapis to see if she was okay, and she felt that he was looking at her too openly. Ritz noted that although he had never heard of a person paralyzed by fear, the eyes of the one who has to be carried on the back should not be so heavy. Roran did not beat around the bush and directly asked why they could not find the way back. Ritz sighed and admitted that it was all because of Chuck. He did not notice the trap. The whole group fell into a pit. They were lucky there were no deadly spikes or poisonous blades below, but the fall was from such a height that clearly exceeded the floor level. Chuck added that if someone had stayed above, they could have pulled him out, but unfortunately everyone fell through. Ritz, offended, said he would never forgive Chuck for falling on him. Chuck waved his hand and replied that he did not care whether he fell on him or on the floor. Nim, looking at them, said that if Chuck wanted to express a last wish, he should do it now before she punished him. He burst out laughing and added with a smile that he was standing in line. Ritz, returning to the topic, explained that despite all their thoughts, they could not find the exit, and Lauren nodded he understood everything. Ritz said that after the fall they were injured, but they had potions, so they somehow recovered, hence his question. Lapis quickly assessed the situation. She had only one chance left to cast a healing spell. It worked much stronger than any potion, and if they waited a bit, it could be used again. It seemed these adventurers did not want to waste their potions and were counting on her magic. Roran instantly understood the essence. They could leave him and take only Lapis. Lapis explained that Roran could stand up for himself and fight, but she herself was not even able to move. Someone would have to carry her, and if it were one of the new companions, their combat strength would decrease, and if they decided to abandon her, everything would happen so quickly and quietly that no one would even notice. Ritz jumped into the conversation, said he heard everything, and directly asked if they really thought he and his comrades were capable of that. Roran and Lapis answered in unison that it indeed looked that way, and Ritz gave up, admitting that they really looked like villains, so he could not deny it. Nim firmly said that if any of them dared to suggest leaving the man and taking only the girl, she would personally save such a person from life. If Ritz summarized it that way, then when something dangerous happens, let Lapis at their request cast a healing spell. In return, he offers to join their group until they leave the ruins, and Lapis agrees, saying she will rely on them. Ritz sincerely thanked him, and said with a smile that now they work side by side. Roran cautiously agreed. Ritz announced that it was time to continue the search for the exit. Roran thought how much he wished that nothing bad would happen, and they would get to the surface safe and sound, but his heart whispered that such an ending was not to be expected. Lapis asked Mr. Roran about the condition of the bandage on his shoulder after one of the previous skirmishes, and Roran assured that the pain and discomfort no longer troubled him. He was offered a special healing potion, and the wounded area was carefully bandaged. Lapis was not entirely satisfied and warned. If his condition worsened, he must immediately tell her. Because of the last two spells, she had saved one specifically for his healing. In his thoughts, Roran noticed. Lapis told everyone that she had only one divine spell left, so she deliberately lied to be cautious. He did not know how to take the fact that Lapis lied after all. They agreed to be honest, so he decided, until they get out of here, they would have to share the same fate with this silver rank group. Chak said that these ruins seemed very strange because, as far as he knew, in the unexplored places left from the ancient civilization, among enemies there were usually only undead creatures, golems, or reanimated corpses. However, he said that none of these enemies appeared in these ruins, and this made him wary. Chuck, on the other hand, said that if anyone did appear, it would definitely be later. So far they had only encountered goblins. Lapis suggested that the goblins might have come from outside, possibly through other cracks similar to the one their group had crawled through. Chuck reminded that not long ago the entrance to the ruins was tightly sealed, and only a few days ago it was opened by a group of mages hired by the man who found the ruins. He added that only a few mages managed to remove that powerful seal, and if the entrance was so well protected, then some guardian or keeper should be hiding inside, but they only found traces of goblins there. Colt suggested that the defenders might have died of old age or perished in battle with the goblins after all, so much time had passed, and he noted that in such a place there should have been at least some remains, but apart from goblins they found nothing. Colts added that if these ruins were inhabited by ghosts, as is the case with the undead, everything would look completely different. He reminded everyone that each ruin has its own features and suggested thinking about what they might have been used for, and Roran mentally admitted that these ruins were indeed too confusing. Chuck suggested postponing their goal for later and focusing on something more practical, getting out of here. Ritz reported that goblins were spotted ahead again. Roran ordered Lapis to go down. Nim calmly and confidently said she would manage without problems and warned them to beware of possible attacks from the rear. Roran confirmed that he understood the order. Ritz emphasized that there were only 7 goblins, so they had a numerical advantage. Colt suggested backing up with magic if needed. Nim refused, saying they could handle it themselves. The group of adventurers indeed destroyed all the goblins. Chuck sighed with relief after the fight. Roran sincerely admired the skill level of his temporary allies. Ritz calmly replied that there was nothing to boast about, they were silver rank. Roran regretfully admitted that he was probably rude again, and he mentally felt that although they were all adventurers, there was a big difference between him and this group. Ritz decisively reminded Ruin that they were here to exterminate monsters, and said that even if they failed to destroy the lair, they could still get a reward for the slain goblins, they just needed to collect ears as proof. Ruin asked if Ritz was sure about that. Ritz confirmed that their group saw no point in giving ears to Roran. Nim noted that Ritz is usually stingy and reluctant to share. Chuck joked that now Roran will be able to boast in front of other adventurers. Nim sarcastically remarked that the sky would probably fall tomorrow if Ritz really gave something away, and Ritz, annoyed, asked them to stop babbling and explained that he was just worried about his less experienced comrades. Lapis suggested collecting goblin earseeing, they might come in handy. Roran agreed. He mentally noted that he had taken too many ears. The sack was soaked with blood and began to stink. Jack added that there was no end to the goblins in sight. Ritz offered Rohan a few more ears. Rohan thanked him, but said he already had more than enough, and noted that others seemed not to notice this smell at all. Lapis sharply said that she did not care, but the stench made it impossible to breathe through the nose, and Lauren noticed that she did not need to say this out loud, it was obvious anyway. Suddenly Nim froze and said she felt something unusual, explaining that the smell in the air had changed. It was no longer the smell of goblins, but the smell of blood. Then he added that the smell Name was talking about was not coming from here, but from the far side of the ruins, so they should move on. Lapis wondered if it is really possible to distinguish human and goblin blood when both smell of rust. Ritz noted that Nim's sight, hearing, and smell are much sharper than theirs. Chuck jokingly added that she has a direct and prickly, like a needle character. Nim hit him in response. Ritz asked them to stop this nonsense, and Chuck tried to justify himself, saying everyone is tense, maybe it's worth relaxing a bit. Ritz ordered to move more carefully and asked if the young lady could continue, and Lapis apologized and said she needed a little more time. Ritz said that no matter how well they knew each other, she would be better off returning to the temple as soon as the opportunity arose. Roran replied that it was her choice and he had no influence over it. Suddenly Chuck called the others and pointed to something terrible. Nim noticed that the leather armor was soaked through with blood. Ritz, gloomily looking around the place, noticed how much blood was around and added that it was still bright red, therefore it could not be old. The cult said that their competitors went into these ruins and suggested that maybe they also ended up here, and among them was someone in leather armor. Nim irritably said that Ritz and Chuck were too reckless and Colts behaved like an idiot. Colts exclaimed that he was not an idiot. Nim said she wanted to hear Roan's opinion. Roan was surprised that she did not ask her comrades, and Nim explained that they could puzzle over it for a long time themselves, but she wanted to know what he thought about the owner of the armor. Rohan understood. Judging by the amount of blood, the owner was most likely dead or even torn apart right here. Nim stated that this armor belonged to their rival, a thief named Vora. Lapis noted that in these ruins they had only seen goblins before and that their find was a woman, and Nim looked at her, asking what she thought about it. Lapis said that it was very strange. If the armor belonged to a woman and she was killed by goblins, then ordinary goblins do not behave like that, and Nim agreed, adding that there was something more hiding in these ruins than just goblins. Lapis remarked that in these ruins, they had only encountered goblins so far, and emphasized that ordinary goblins do not kill women, they know what to do with them if they capture them. She realized if the previously found armor really belonged to a woman, but she was still killed, then something was definitely wrong with these goblins. She added that if the victim remained alive, ordinary goblins would first mock her and then drag her to their lair. Rorik concluded that in these ruins, probably not only goblins live, and decided that this was how they should think now. Nim approached Rorin, reminded him about the hole through which they entered the ruins, and asked if he remembered where it was. Rorin said that the road actually leads only in one direction, so it is easier to navigate by it. Nim thought a little, agreed, and told Ritz that she felt something strange in this area therefore, in her opinion, they should go to the surface and regroup. Ritz asked for a minute to think, and explained that he understands something is wrong with the ruins, but one blood-stained piece of armor is not a sufficient reason to retreat. He said that a more significant reason to retreat is needed. Returning just for one piece of equipment would be unconvincing. Chuck suggested at least searching for enemy soldier dog tags to have a justification for returning. Ritz agreed with the idea and ordered everyone to be on alert, adding that returning is not possible yet, and that it was clear from the very beginning this is not a simple matter. And he also said that if they find those enemy dog tags Chuck mentioned, then they could consider another decision. NEM agreed with the stated position. RITS ordered to continue moving forward and be fully prepared. Lapis approached Lauren and addressed him by name. Lauren asked if she was feeling better. Lapis confirmed that she was better and thanked him for his help. Ritz asked if she would be able to walk normally again. Lapis replied that she feels quite well, and added that she likes being on Mr. Roran's back so much that she would even want to continue, but understands that she should not burden him any further. Ritz asked with interest if they have any special relationship. Roran immediately replied that they do not have such a relationship. Lapis, smiling, added that they are working on it. Chuck exclaimed with admiration that Roran really won the heart of a true beauty and is really great. Nim slapped Chuck and sharply said that if he wants to attract attention, let him do it himself. Chuck said with bitter irony that most likely he will first die at Nim's hands and then from the claws of some monster. Ritz turned to Roaring and asked if he would go into battle, then ordered him to guard the rear and added that the young lady would go with him. Lapis said that they can be relied upon and added that it was a difficult test for Roaring. She emphasized that they were entrusted with investigating the ruins of an ancient civilization and reminded that such work is usually not entrusted to copper-rank adventurers, and Roran reminded her that she must understand the situation they are now in. Lapis admitted that she was really scared. Roran replied that this is too much already and asked her to leave. He thought that no one around noticed her behavior. He explained that he understood her enthusiasm, but asked her to hold back a little. Lapis agreed and immediately asked the next question, what is their goal now? Nim explained that their main mission is to explore the ruins, but it is no less important to try to find out the fate of the rivals, and both must be the top priority. Lapis agreed and suggested returning to the hole through which they fell. Ritz asked to explain why this was necessary. Lapis suggested that the pit could have been a trap for stranger sand, since it did not kill. Probably the entire level served the same purpose. She assumed that the monsters were deliberately left exactly to deal with those who broke inside, and added that although this device seems cunning, at different times and in different countries people always know how to deal with fools who meddle in others' affairs. She suggested postponing such delicate topics for now, and said that at this level there is nothing truly important. In her opinion, it was pointless to study it if their real goal was the ruins themselves. Ritz asked why they should return to the same pit. Lapis said that there might be a hidden passage to the trap mechanisms Hirevrion who fell in could have flowed there, and maybe the path upwards starts there, and Nim replied that this idea should be taken into account, especially when there are no other ideas. He even remembered that he hadn't noticed anything suspicious there, but added that if the trap was really not deadly, then the exit was most likely carefully disguised, and he simply might not have noticed it. Ritz smiled slyly and reminded that it was Chuck, and Chuck sighed, admitted that arguing was pointless, and agreed to return to inspect the place where they had fallen through. Colts, having looked over the map he himself drew, indicated the direction they should head. Later he reported that they had arrived at the place. Roran noticed that the ceiling in this room was very high and suggested that the pit was covered like a lid. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable here, and he asked aloud if there really was a passage upward from here. Jack confirmed his doubts and added that he is a silver rank thief, so if something is hidden, he will definitely notice it. At that moment the passage suddenly opened. Morin asked with surprise what exactly Lapis had done. She explained that the control panel was hidden among the illusion materials and was indeed barely noticeable. Chuck persistently reminded that the older comrades should have noticed such a detail, and Colts called Chuck a fool and added that the thief at least should have noticed the trap in advance. Roran admitted he does not fully understand these subtleties. Nim quietly whispered that there were stairs ahead. Ritz confirmed this and suggested that they all go up. Nim turned to the others and clearly indicated that he was ready to proceed. Chak carefully examined the sturdy ladder and said it was safe to climb. He resolutely declared that he would climb first and thought, even if a monster meets him at the top, there is a chance he will hold on and not fall. Chuck's arguments and awareness of the seriousness of the situation expressed her determination and readiness to go to the end, as if on a last journey, and pushed him to fight. Chuck, somewhat doubting, expressed uncertainty and asked if Nim was confusing something about what was happening. Roran, watching their conversation, realized everything they had done was in vain as if all their efforts had brought no benefit. And Lapis, pondering what had happened, came to the conclusion, if these people had found the way back and managed to climb up, their paths most likely would not have crossed, and that could be called luck. Jack said that it was quiet above and no one was there, calmed them down, and suggested that others climb up one by one and ask who would dare to follow. Lapis assessed the situation and suggested waiting a bit, while Roran, not sharing her optimism, warned it was still too early to rejoice. He reminded them that, most likely, after the ascent they would be told to return, because they would end up on the same level from which Ritz and others had once fallen, so they already had an idea of a possible exit. Lapis admitted that she had not considered such a turn of events and regretted it since she had a unique opportunity to explore the mysterious ruins, but for that she would have to climb up. Lapis added that perhaps there really was nothing important left on this level. In his thoughts, Roran honestly admitted to himself that he wanted nothing more than to leave these dangerous ruins as soon as possible, but duty in such circumstances kept him here. Roar pondered, then aloud laid out everything they could offer to help in this situation. Lapis also thought and replied that, apart from divine spells, this was a difficult question. Ritz admitted that climbing was hard. Lapis added that if he suddenly claimed to know how to use magic, it could arouse suspicion. Roran suggested thinking about knowledge or skills that could come in handy. Lapis said that if she managed to figure out what this place was, she could at least sketch a rough map of the surroundings. He was noticeably surprised and sincerely admired how she did it. Lapis enthusiastically explained, wherever you end up in the world, guild buildings are almost completely identical in architecture, and although, of course, individual workers' decisions make a difference, overall they have the same structure. She noticed that the same rule applies to ancient ruins after all. Past civilizations built structures for specific purposes and repeatedly used the same architectural schemes. Roran was interested in possible exceptions to this rule. Lapis admitted, here, as in any system, there are exceptions. Sometimes you come across truly strange ruins that do not resemble familiar buildings at all. Ritz had already started speaking when suddenly Chuck jumped down and loudly declared that the situation had suddenly and very badly worsened. He loudly warned everyone, goblins are attacking, and urgently urged others to jump immediately. Roan, trying to understand what was happening, anxiously exclaimed about what was going on. Nim, feeling the approaching horror, shouted that they were still looking at the same ruins, and in amazement did not understand how so many goblins could have been hiding here unnoticed all this time. Ritz, stunned, admitted that he himself did not understand what was happening, and said that the goblins appeared suddenly, as if from nowhere. He could not comprehend what kind of attack it was, and Chuck, not hiding his fear, shouted that he did not want to die at the hands of goblins. Nim took the initiative into her own hands and ordered him to be silent and run, explaining that now they had no other choice but to flee. Roran despairingly realized that they were again in a very dangerous situation. With such a number of enemies, one wrong turn and they would get lost, and the horde of goblins would instantly catch up with them. This was supposed to lead to an inevitable end, and for him such an outcome was completely unfair. Colts barely said that he could no longer move. Lapis added that she had no strength left either. Nim shouted to Colts and Lapis anxiously, hoping they were okay. Chuck warned them not to stop, because stopping could lead to death. Rory mentally felt that his comrades were already completely exhausted, and with anxiety realized, Lapis had not managed to restore enough mana for them to run for long. He ran up to them, picked up both Colts and Lapis, and rushed forward without slowing down. Chuck asked how he felt, and Ron, worried, replied that he was used to it. For a mercenary, it was usual to carry wounded comrades, although he admitted that he had hardly slept the last few days. To himself, he added that it is really difficult. Colts, barely squeezing out words, apologized to Roran and promised that he would definitely repay him for the help. Lapis, barely breathing, apologized for causing him trouble again. Roran said that instead of wasting their last strength on running, they should think about how to get out of this situation with minimal losses, and emphasized that if he gets tired, they will be caught. Lapis approaches Colt with a proposal to cause mass destruction with one fireball. Colts, assessing the situation, said that again with such a huge number of enemies, this spell would be just a drop in the ocean, and he cannot recommend its use. Lapis suggested building a stone wall to stop the enemies, and Colts doubted that it would be possible to block the entire passage with it, but added that he would try, although he noted that there are too many enemies and the wall would not hold them for long. Lapis proposed using Firestorm, and Colts replied that he can cast this spell only twice and doubted whether it would be enough. Lapis admitted that no, but still enthusiastically praised his magical abilities, calling him a true master of magic. The Colts replied that Mrs. Lapis also understood magic. Roran sharply interrupted their conversation and ordered them to stop the useless chatter. Deep down, he hoped that they would manage to find at least some way to escape the approaching threat. Roran turned to his comrades, and with hope in his voice, said that maybe someone among them already has an idea how to break out of this trouble. Lapis replied that unfortunately they lack both physical strength and means to effectively fight such a huge crowd of goblins, so there is no question of a fight. Chuck exclaimed in despair that if that happens, they will all simply be eaten. Lapis, stunned, said that she and Lady Nim will most likely be captured and used as mothers for reproduction. Colts grimly added that the woman from that other group was apparently killed and then eaten, and this only confirmed her fears. Ritz sharply expressed his dissatisfaction, reminding others to keep themselves in check and at least somewhat preserve their dignity. As the critical situation demanded, Nim said in a weak voice that she is getting worse and worse, and it is already clear that she will not last long. Chuck offered her help, promising to carry her himself if it would allow him to gain at least a little time and increase the chances of rescue. Nim thanked him and said that if things got really bad, she would fully rely on him. Chuck, looking at her, admitted that everything happening had already become truly bad. Warren desperately searched his mind for an alternative exit and thought that the rescue might be exactly on the stairs from which they started. He felt that there was no clear plan, everyone's strength was fading, and anyone could soon lose touch with reality. He reasoned that if they just kept running without a plan, they would most likely die, and although he himself was not entirely sure about his idea, doing nothing was definitely worse. Roran admitted aloud that he could not say for sure if he knew the exact exit, but still had a few specific suggestions. He reminded the others of the path they had run earlier. Ritz tried to recall the route, but realized he had forgotten the way and thought that maybe Chuck should remember it. He wondered if they could return to the hatch from which the goblins had fallen out. Chuck noticed that they could not return the same way. They would have to look for other passages, and immediately asked Ron what he intended to do when he got there. Roar confidently said that if so many goblins had come down from there, then probably almost none were left above. He assumed that the entire crowd had jumped down and could not return the same way, and since that would require using a ladder, the enemies could not attack all at once. Chuck noticed that goblins were not stupid enough to just wait until they started climbing, and realized, if they drove them into a narrow passage, it would be the end. Roran asked if the stallions could use magic to buy some time. Colty, focusing, decided to try to burn the enemies from the front with a firestorm, and then block their path with a stone wall. He expressed his readiness and said he could be relied upon. Ritz, having listened to him, shrugged and said that it was unlikely to stop such a crowd at all. Roran confidently stated that as long as the stone wall did not fall, they would be able to climb up, and added that if they didn't make it in time, he himself would become their shield, since it was his idea. Ritz objected in surprise, doubting that Rowan could single-handedly resist such gigantic opponents. Rowan said that the firestorm in the stone wall would itself create a barrier, and that, according to his feeling, there would not be many enemies at once, so he urged the others to climb up as quickly as possible to avoid the worst. Ritz nodded in agreement and told Chuck to lead everyone to the same burrow. Chuck confirmed, and without hesitation, pointed in the direction they needed to go. Ritz warned Colts, start preparing to use magic. Colts replied that he was ready. Ritz said that as soon as they reached the place, Chuck would be the first to climb up, followed by reinforcements, and he, as the group leader, would stay to cover the others. Roran, hearing this, calmly said that he was pleased with such recognition, but he would carry out this task himself. Ritz disagreed and explained that Lauren was too slow because of his things. By the time he climbed out, the goblins would have torn him apart, and he himself, with support from above, could instantly jump up. Roran reminded him that the adventurer profession was new to him, but he had previously served as a mercenary, and added that he was tired of someone else covering him on the battlefield, so he suggested relying on him. Chuck reported that no one else had fallen out of that pit. Ritz took this as a good sign and urged everyone to climb up as quickly as possible. The goblins were already catching up with them, and he gave Colts the order to use magic. Colts began the spell. He summoned a fierce fire whirl, called forth a firestorm, and then tore a huge barrier, a stone wall, from the ground. Ritz commanded, "Let's get up now." Roar mentally noted that this is exactly how a silver-rank mage acts: quickly, powerfully, and precisely. Ritz, observing what was happening, sighed irritably. The goblin's actions seemed completely inappropriate to him. Roan thoughtfully remarked that although the magic lasted briefly, the flames were so strong they left heat behind, and added that goblins usually are not known for intelligence, but he had never seen them pursue prey so fiercely. Ritz, realizing there was no more time for discussion, shouted to Roran, "Stop arguing and get up immediately." Meanwhile, the goblins broke through the stone wall. Roran stayed downstairs and joined the fight to hold them back. Ritz raised his head and shouted to Colts to move faster. Colts, focused, replied that he was trying. Roran suddenly realized that he would not be able to avoid the fight. Chuck looked around and noticed that there were no enemies nearby. He reached out to Nim, helped her to stand, and with relief saw that it worked. Nim, faintly smiling, thanked Chuck for the help. Chuck tried to encourage her and said, "Don't worry, we'll get through this now." Looking up, Roran exclaimed why the others had not yet risen, as time was against them, and Ritz, trying to stay calm, replied that there was very little left to the place and they had almost reached it. Nim, noticing Chuck, called him, pointing to where he was standing. Track nervously twitched at her words and reported that the goblins were approaching again. He addressed Lapis, asking for Ritz's help, and asked Colts if the magic was ready. Colts, breathing heavily, said he had one more chance to use magic. Chuck offered to stay and hold back the goblins until Ritz and Roran reached the upper level. Roran, fending off enemies, mentally noted that he was killing goblins one by one, but their number did not decrease, and he tried not to slip in the pools of blood and not fall, stumbling over bodies. However, one strange thing struck him: there were far fewer corpses on the ground than there should have been. According to his observations, when goblins fell from above, they piled tightly on each other and were crushed in the crowd, so many should have died. But when he came to that place, there were almost no bodies left, and he began to wonder what this could mean. Perhaps the goblins were carrying away the bodies of their fallen comrades, but why remained unknown. Lapis loudly shouted to Mr. Roan to get his attention. He looked and asked if everyone had managed to get up there. Lapis nodded that everyone was in place but warned. There were goblins above a few, and they seemed strange to her. She added that the group was holding off the pressure for now, but the situation was worsening every minute and they could soon be cornered from both sides. And Lauren, hearing this, reacted sharply, irritably noting that goblins appeared everywhere, as if someone was deliberately luring them here. He suddenly realized that he had to get to the top as soon as possible, otherwise it would be too late. Reaching the level of the others, he immediately destroyed what they were climbing on. Roran asked what the situation was there and what was happening. Lapis replied that Chuck was wounded, Ritz was fighting the enemy, but suddenly she noticed Nim's condition and became worried. Roran mentally asked himself who the black goblin he had seen was. Nim, concentrating, noticed that the enemy was not afraid at Aland. This was troubling. Lauren hit the goblin and saved Nim from the attack. It flashed through his mind that he would have dealt with an ordinary goblin long ago, but this one was different. His skin was so tough that it was hard to believe. Nim took advantage of the moment and struck the goblin right in the eyes. Roran thought that even if the skin was tough, the eyes were much more vulnerable. He said that if the first blow does not kill him, he will strike again and again until he falls. Lapis warned that another goblin appeared from the other side. Ritz howled in pain as the enemy grabbed him, tightly crushing his bones. Ron turned to Colts and asked how his magic was, and Colts quietly admitted that all his strength was exhausted, and for some time he would not be able to even use simple spells. Then Roran rushed at the second goblin to save Ritz. Together they were able to destroy their opponents. Colts, breathing heavily, explained that the black goblins appeared suddenly. Arrows did not affect them, and Chuck was injured while trying to protect Nim. Ritz added that it was then he managed to climb upstairs. Nim, with a worried voice, apologized to Chuck, sure it was her fault. Chuck interrupted her, saying she shouldn't be so modest, it doesn't suit her, and added that it was more important now to take care of her uterus. Roran asked Lapis if she had found out anything important, and she replied that she had a premonition. If it was true, then everything was much more serious than it seemed. In her opinion, they had ended up in extremely dangerous, ominous ruins. Roran repeated her words as if confirming once more yes, they were talking about those disgusting ruins. Lapis asked Mr. Ritz for permission to check something. Roran was surprised and asked if she wanted to stay here. Lapis shook her head but insisted that these ruins needed to be explored. She added that if they left them active, the consequences could be catastrophic, so first they needed to leave this area immediately, otherwise they would be attacked again. Ritz agreed with her reasoning and emphasized that he did not want to encounter those black goblins again. Lapis suggested casting a spell. Jack smiled calmly and said it was not necessary, the medicine was already working. He just felt a little dizzy from the blow, he explained, and Lapis seriously advised that after returning, he must definitely see a doctor because head injuries could be dangerous. Jack agreed and promised to heed her advice as soon as they returned. Ritz asked if Jack could walk on his own, and he responded defiantly. There was no need to ask such nonsense, just give the order when needed, and I will move. Dim intervened and gently said there was no point in rushing anything, and Chak confidently replied that he was fine and there was no need to worry, adding that he had been hit on the head and lost consciousness for a moment, but now he could move normally. Colt admitted that his situation was much worse. All magical powers were exhausted, and he could no longer fight. Chak noted that no one blamed him for that. Ritz confirmed that if Colts had not destroyed that black goblin, the consequences could have been unpredictable, thanked him, and suggested leaving this place as soon as possible. Roran looked at Lapis and thought that he moved as if he knew exactly where to go. He turned to Lapis and asked what kind of creatures they were. They had too hard skin and strong bones, and he wondered if they were a higher breed of goblins. Lapis expressed the opinion that they could be creatures like hobgoblins, but much larger, and Roran shook his head. Just growing taller would not explain such a change. Lapis turned to him and asked if he had noticed anything else strange. Roran recalled seeing those goblins gathering the bodies of their dead relatives and doubted that they did it for food. He was alarmed by the behavior of the local goblins. It was clearly different from the usual, and their number seemed too large. Lapis agreed with his observation and confirmed that these goblins were indeed unusual. Roran added that, in his opinion, such people can only be found in these ruins. Lapis suddenly changed her tone and unexpectedly asked if he was interested in pharmaceuticals and alchemy. Roran replied that he had heard these words, but among his acquaintances, there was no one who studied these sciences. Lapis said that it is enough that he simply knows about their existence. She clarified that pharmacists and alchemists experiment on living creatures. Roran noted that new medicines are usually tested on laboratory rats. Lapis asked if he knew why rats are used in such experiments. Roran coldly replied that such information is unlikely to reach the hands of an ordinary mercenary. Lapis explained simply and frankly, the reason is quite banal. Rats grow quickly, reproduce quickly, and have many offspring, so they are convenient to use in experiments. Roran could not help but notice the same traits: rapid reproduction, swift growth, and numerous offspring. They closely resembled goblins. Lapis confidently confirmed his suspicions and suggested that before them could be a real research laboratory where experiments on goblins were specially conducted. Lapis explained that goblins are easy to breed, they are undemanding and do not require special conditions. She emphasized that experiments with them do not cause regret because goblins are quite primitive, although they have traits similar to humans. She was certain this was exactly what made goblins ideal test subjects. She rhetorically asked if there was anyone better for experiments, but clearly implied herself such did not exist, and from how the goblins were treated here, Lapis concluded that they were in a real laboratory. Roran repeated the word laboratory and noticed with surprise how simple they were. Lapis further explained that goblins are truly incredibly omnivorous. They literally eat everything, from garbage and waste to dead bodies. Records of an ancient civilization said that goblins reduced waste by as much as 80, and it was astonishing. Roran agreed that goblins were indeed very unpretentious. Lapis continued to think, for representatives of the ancient civilization, no matter how many goblins there were, they were still just trash, and she noticed that during reproduction, different species began to appear among them, clearly the result of experiments. Roran wondered if these were the same creatures they had already encountered. Lapis confirmed that these ancient ruins were indeed a breeding ground for goblins, and it was then that a new wave of goblins attacked the group. Lapis said it was worse than just breeding. In this place, goblins were not simply bred, they were subjected to much deeper manipulation. Roran was confused and did not understand what she was talking about. Lapis returned to the conversation and explained that this was not an ordinary farm. Deliberate modifications were carried out here, and possibly even processes related to evolution. Roran asked her to explain what she meant. Lapis explained that, in simplified terms, the essence was that they were studying methods to make goblins stronger. She noted that many goblins were chasing them, but among them there was no sign of any evolutionary form, which made her wary. She suggested that the local goblins were altered so that they would not produce higher forms, neither hobgoblins nor goblin mages. The researchers deliberately removed any chance of their appearance because they considered it pointless. Roran was worried about their size. The goblins he had seen were very large, and Lapis calmly noted that even bigger ones were still just goblins. The guests were noisy, saying that the goblins they met outside had managed to break out through cracks, and among them was even a goblin mage. Lapis clarified that changes in goblins in the ruins were limited. But as soon as they went outside, transformations began to happen to them. She added that she believed the ruins had been dormant for a long time, but at some point they were reactivated. Cause could have been either someone from outside who activated the system or an open passage that triggered the restoration of processes. Roran wanted to understand why it would be bad to leave everything as it was. Lapis explained that the large black goblins were improved versions created on this base, but what scared her most was their behavior. Roran asked what exactly worried her. Lapis continued the conversation and suggested that goblins here did not need to reproduce in the usual way. She believed that somewhere in the ruins there was a device created for reproducing new individuals, and it was most likely there that goblins were born. Because of this, there was no point in raising young naturally, so captured female adventurers were simply killed. But she recalled one terrible episode, how a goblin attacked Mrs. Nim and tried to tear off her clothes. Lapis emphasized that this act could not be explained by reproductive instinct. She assumed that this goblin was not quite ordinary, a hybrid with human features, as if the result of crossbreeding, possibly connected with one of Mr. Ritz's rivals and his team. Lauren, hearing this, was outraged and firmly stated that in that case the creature could not be called a goblin. Lapis objected, explaining that essentially it was still a goblin even if the mother was human. No one would call such creatures half-goblins, and even with a human component, they remain goblins. The scariest thing was that the process of strengthening and improving goblins was already underway here. The local specimens had intelligence close to human and could learn, so Roran fell silent, understanding what he had heard. Lapis continued and reminded that they had already discussed the strange behavior of goblins, how they gathered the bodies of their fallen comrades. She suggested a frightening thing. These bodies were probably used as material for creating new specimens, and from the bodies of more experienced goblins, it was possible to get even stronger ones than the previous, and if this process was repeated again and again in a closed cycle, the result could be a goblin surpassing even a dragon in strength. Such a goblin would not only be physically strong, it would also have vast knowledge and hardened combat experience. So Lapis, considering all this, posed an almost rhetorical question. What, in Roran's opinion, could happen in such a case? Without thinking, Roran asked how to disable these ruins, and Lapis admitted that she no longer had an answer to that question. He felt pain from disappointment. He realized he had placed too many hopes on her, sincerely believing that she knew how to stop these ruins. Lapis added that all ruins are different from each other, so there is no single, exact way to disable them. According to her, this was not at all due to a lack of knowledge, and Roran, a little stunned, quietly said something, trying to express his state. Lapis noticed his reaction and said she did not like the expression on his face. Roran froze, a question spinning in his head. What was he like at that moment, and where were they going next? Lapis replied that first they would go to the private rooms that once belonged to the inhabitants of the ancient civilization, because she believed that some furniture and items there might have belonged to those who ruled this place, and therefore there might be instructions or documents shedding light on what was happening. Roaring was surprised to hear this. Could people have lived here? Lapis explained that there is teleportation magic connecting cities and research centers, but to activate it requires an incredible amount of magical energy, and she doubted whether it was worth spending such resources at all. Lauren admitted that he was not sure if our efforts were worth it, and Lapis added that if the ancients really used teleportation, then they probably built a full-fledged residential complex there to stay for a long time. Roran doubted, but Lapis insisted. Residential premises had to exist. Researchers and other staff could live there. She was going to go there to look for materials to find a way to disable the ruins, and if she came across something useful among the finds, she would gladly take it for herself. He growled and warned her not to make too bold statements, especially about theft. Lapis replied that all the owners of this place had been dead for centuries, so the concept of theft did not apply here. Roran shrugged and said that in that case it was wiser to collect everything valuable. Lapis agreed and promised that she would do so. She thought that if this place was ever disabled, it was done by an ancient civilization, and it was quite possible that all the documents about these ruins were not stored in one place. Roran asked what to do in that case. Lapis briefly replied that she did not know what to do if that was really the case. Roran mentally realized that the situation was still difficult. Goblins could attack again at any moment. Chak was wounded. Colt had used up all his magic and could no longer fight. Ritz and Nim were still holding on, and Roran himself felt exhaustion approaching. He anxiously noticed that his weapon was already on the edge. If he cut down 2 or 3 more goblins, it would most likely break. Lapis, hearing this, became worried and advised him to think about a replacement. Rohan admitted that he would make the final decision later when the weapon completely failed, but for now it was more important to obtain information. Lapis supported him, saying that information was really important, and finally they reached the residential part. She announced with mockery that now they would start rob. Roran became alert and asked if it was allowed to do so. There could be traps there. Lapis assured him that she had some knowledge about such ruins, so there was no need to worry. Ritz asked doubtfully if that was acceptable. Lapis opened one of the rooms, glanced at the emptiness, and said with disappointment that there was nothing useful there, so she suggested moving on to the next one. Roran, looking at her, said that she did this better than others, so she was worth relying on. Nim, quietly looking around the room, noticed that they were in the dwellings of representatives of an ancient civilization. Ritz added that everything around was the legacy of these people, and suggested simply taking what they found and leaving, because their task was to inspect the ruins, and what they had learned was quite enough. Lapis did not object and said that no one forbade them to return. Ritz suggested going together, because the group itself did not yet fully understand what they were dealing with, so they needed to report everything to the authorities so they could decide what to do. Lapis chuckled and said that they would have to summon people of gold and mithril rank, and gathering them would not be easy. Ritz mentally acknowledged there were only a few hundred people of gold rank worldwide, only a few dozen of mithril, and fewer than 10 holders of the highest crimson gold, and he realized that this was indeed not easy. Lapis said that if they wanted to leave, she would not hold them back, promised to pray for their safety, but nothing good awaited them in these ruins. She barked and realized that her words sounded harsh. Lapis explained that no one could be forced to go with you. Ron quietly laughed and asked if that meant he should follow her. Lapis was a little confused and asked if he really was not going, and Roran replied that now they were in the same boat and he could not leave. Lapis sighed with relief and admitted that she herself would not have managed. She thanked him and said she had good news. Roran asked him to tell her what the news was. Lapis joyfully reported that she had managed to find records about these ruins, and there was also information on how to disable them. Roran, surprised by her abilities, exclaimed that she could read the ancient language, and Lapis proudly reminded her that she was a priestess of the god of knowledge. Rowan smiled and asked if all the priests of this god were so clever. Lapis replied that the world has plenty of smart people, but those like her are special. Rowan got down to business and asked what they should do next. Lapis explained that she believes there must be some control room there. She found a panel there that can shut down all processes and immediately suggested going there. Ritz overheard the conversation and, not hiding his curiosity, asked if they really found something. Lapis confirmed yes, they were lucky. Then she turned to Mr. Ritz and asked what decision he would make. Ritz decisively stated they would go together. Chuck added that this way they would have a better chance of survival. Lapis, having heard this, nodded and suggested running quickly to the control room. According to her, as soon as they get there, they will be able to put an end to everything that is happening. One of the men suddenly remembered a moment from the past, when he was still a novice and first stepped over the threshold of the guild on that very day. In the same branch, a man named Ritz also registered. They set off from Ritz at the same time, then hardly crossed paths or communicated, but he accidentally heard the name Ritz and it stuck in his memory. Later, Ritz was on everyone's lips, and the man, although he did not want to, heard these rumors. Whether Ritz was valued more or some important event happened during a research mission, their paths diverged, and although they started the same, Ritz advanced faster. He reached the silver rank before him, and he had to accept it. Ritz became his eternal rival. The man's comrades, noticing his pensiveness, began teasing him, joking about his thoughts regarding Mr. Ritz and mocking the phrase he had heard about him, whether he liked it or not. The man sharply ordered them to be silent. He admitted to himself that he was very grateful for this unexpected opportunity to prove something not only to others, but also to himself. Later, one of the girls from the administration explained that they needed to examine the ruins near the village vine, and to go faster, they decided to immediately assign the task to 2 silver rank groups. She added that they would pay depending on the quantity and quality of the information received. The man mentally noted that this was a great opportunity to find out which of the 2 was better. When Ritz introduced himself as the leader of his group, the man instantly reacted. Ritz's confident, calm tone irritated him, and he felt he had to show he was no worse. A worthy response was already forming in his soul, so as not to yield. One of the girls on his team, sincerely impressed, loudly announced that standing before them was the real Mr. Ritz. Was glad to meet him. Another comrade remarked that it was an incredible coincidence. The same girl immediately turned back to Nim and enthusiastically noted her beauty, saying that all elves are beautiful. Chuck, who was standing nearby, commented on her words and said that the girl was called beautiful, and another team member added that he had heard about Mr. Colt's skillful magic. Ritz, slightly squinting his eyebrows, demanded explanations. He wanted to understand how they found out about all this. The man's comrades admitted that rumors about Ritz's squad were spreading everywhere, and added that their leader was a true fan of Ritz. The man, irritably defending himself, firmly refused to admit that he was a fan, insisting that he simply remembered they started at the same time. He smiled and reminded that he had already declared Ritz his rival in this mission, then added that since there was a chance to talk, it was not worth missing the opportunity to get acquainted. He loudly addressed Ritz, saying that they became adventurers on the same day, and since then Ritz had pulled ahead. The man admitted that he admired him a little, so he threw down the gauntlet. If their group turned out to be better at exploring the ruins, Ritz would definitely remember his name as the name of his rival. Then he called his comrades and led them forward. One of his companions asked if he was going to introduce himself properly. Someone else noticed that Ritz really looked impressed. The man spoke quietly, wondering if he could pass by them. The comrades confidently replied that they would definitely win and that the moment would come when the rival would recognize him. One of them said he would be there that day, and the man himself loudly declared that they would be the victors. Chuck, who had been watching the whole time, quietly repeated the word rivals. Ritz nodded in response, and when the competitors left, Ritz's team gathered to discuss how to accept the challenge. They decided that in exploring the ruins, the most important things remained speed and quality of work. Whoever coped better would receive not only a bigger reward but also recognition, so the conditions, essentially, had not changed. Ritz, speaking his thoughts aloud, said that maybe he should find out the name of the one who challenged him. Later, when the situation changed, Nim sadly suggested trying to find the tokens of that group so that, if necessary, at least they could be buried. Lapis announced that they had finally received instructions regarding the construction of these ruins, so now it was time to act without delay. She insisted that everyone hurry, because the sooner they reached the so-called control room, the sooner they could put an end to what was happening around them. But according to her, the person who had previously been the administrator of this establishment turned out to be decent, responsible, and prudent. He left no strange secrets and had no locks with incomprehensible activation rules. Lapis added that if he had been different, more closed, and cunning, she would have had to wonder who he really was and how to extract the whole truth from him. At that moment, Roran, without saying a word, thought with surprise about where Lapis could have learned so many details about the structure and purpose of such ruins. He admitted that it was really interesting, but intuitively felt that the answer might not please him, so he decided not to ask unnecessary questions. But Lapis, as if reading his mood, calmly said that she had learned all this information from books. Ritz glanced at everyone and reminded them that no one knew when the goblins would appear again. He openly complained about what a dirty and unpleasant job they had got, and Roran could not help but agree. He thought to himself that they had been sent only on a routine reconnaissance, but instead they found themselves in such a disgusting ruin that everything turned out to be much more dangerous than anyone could have expected. Lapis looked at Lauren and guessed that he probably considered their group unlucky for getting lost in these ruins. Roran was surprised by the accuracy of her guess and asked if she could read minds, and Lapis replied that everything was written plainly on Mr. Roran's face, so he would do well to be more careful with his facial expressions. She added that probably the worst fate befell not them, but Mr. Ritz's opponents, and Roran reluctantly nodded, as if admitting that there might be some truth in that. Lapis sharply ordered to stop the noise. They had already arrived, and she invited everyone inside. Lauren looked around and noticed how simple everything looked. Lapis warned that it was too early to rejoice, because one important task still remained. She pointed to the panel and said that before them was the control console, from which the entire structure of the ruins could be controlled. Roran asked if she could figure out the device. Lapis confidently nodded and assured that of course she would manage, and at that moment Chuck loudly remarked that the doors slid open. Lapis, with the same confidence, assured that everything was under her control and she could be relied upon, but suddenly froze. Strange red symbols appeared on the screen. She, confused, explained that for some reason the system did not accept the stop command. To execute it, the control function had to be activated, but according to her, there was no error in the command itself, so all this seemed especially strange to her. Roran asked if she could explain why the command did not work if it was correct at all. Lapis sighed. If she knew the exact reason, she would have fixed everything long ago, and suggested that perhaps the device had become unstable over the centuries. If that was really the reason, she definitely would not be able to fix the device. Ritz anxiously noticed that the entire screen was now covered with those red symbols. Roran, feeling threatened, demanded to know what exactly was happening. Lapis finally realized that there really was a laboratory before them, and that meant there had to be an office for the staff. Roran, though reluctantly, admitted that this was quite possible. Lapis added that all employees who had access to the consoles had to be registered in the laboratory system. Roran looked at her and asked to explain what exactly she meant. At that moment, Ritz shouted loudly. 2 doors immediately opened. Chuck, in panic, exclaimed that he did not understand what was happening. Lapis explained in a quiet voice that a biometric verification error had occurred. At first, only researchers were allowed into this facility. Unregistered users like her could not even enter the stop command, and the flashing red symbols meant that the biometrics had failed. She warned if they ignored these messages and continued to enter commands, after 3 failed attempts the system would lock all controls, and that is exactly what happened. Now they could do nothing. The system recognized them as violators and activated the internal interception protocol from now on. The facility was to eliminate them as a threat. Ritz warned that this was extremely dangerous and decisively demanded a clear plan. Rorn asked for a simpler explanation. It was still unclear to him. Lapis simply and clearly explained. The system perceives them as foreigners and now wants to get rid of them with the help of goblins. The exit is already blocked, and this control room is directly connected to the room where goblins are created. She was sure very soon they would rush in here in a group, and they would have to hold back their onslaught. Ritz grumbled irritably but agreed. Lapis apologized and said she would try to deceive the system. If she succeeded, the goblin threat would disappear. But while she worked, she would be completely defenseless, and Ritz suspiciously asked why she even thought she could. Lapis calmly stated that she was a priestess of the god of knowledge, so she had reason to believe in her own power. Roar asked if she really had an explanation for everything that was happening. Lapis proudly declared that she had not uttered a single word of untruth. Roran nodded, acknowledging that this might be so, and told her to continue working. And he himself promised that they would hold back the enemy onslaught. Lapis thanked them and said she fully relied on them. Nim reported that the goblins were already approaching. Ritz agreed they had no other choice. He noted that at least the doors were not too wide. He ordered Nim to stay near the device and cover Lapis while she worked, then turned to Chuck and asked if he was ready. Chuck, gritting his teeth, replied that he could handle it, though all this annoyed him terribly. Ritz looked at Roran and said that now it was his move. Roran confidently confirmed that he was ready. They rushed to fight the stream of goblins, repelling them one by one. Suddenly, a black goblin appeared even more dangerous than the others. Chuck looked at Colts and told him to stay closer to Lapis because he himself no longer had the strength to fight. Colts, lowering his head, apologized for his helplessness. Lauren, looking the black goblin in the eyes, firmly said that he would take him on. He continued to fight desperately with the black goblin, giving his last strength to every strike. Roran felt that the sword was about to break from the tension and constant blows against the thick, dense skin of the enemy. This blade would not withstand another serious clash. He shouted at Lapis at the top of his lungs, demanding to know how much longer she would work. Lapis, without taking her eyes off the panel, promised to do it as quickly as possible, but added that she was not just fighting some system. This was technology left by an ancient kingdom, and such a complex thing could not be overcome in a couple of minutes. Despite everything, she expected to complete the operation no later than in an hour. Nim exclaimed anxiously that she had almost no arrows left, and they simply would not hold out that long. Colt admitted that he had only one spell charge left. After that, he would no longer be able to use magic. Chuck, hitting another goblin, shouted fiercely that they seemed endless. Inside, his anxiety grew. He noticed that with each new wave, these creatures became stronger, even stronger than those they had fought before. Roran noticed that even in the middle of the battle, the goblins continued to carry away the bodies of their comrades from the battlefield, and he felt this disturbing pattern with disgust. Hearing this, Lapis explained that fallen goblins were considered a very valuable resource for them, and added that allowing goblins to take bodies was extremely dangerous, even if it lasted only a few seconds. Chuck, breathing heavily, admitted that if they could really stop it, they would have done so long ago. Ritz assured that they were doing everything possible to hold back the enemy and maintain their position. Rurin wanted to know if it was really that important, but Lapis reminded him that they had already discussed this. She explained that goblins used the bodies of dead allies not just as trophies, but as carriers of experience. Each fallen goblin accumulated combat data, tactics, defense, maneuvers, strike power, and all this was passed on to new creatures. This was the meaning of their rapid evolution. According to the information in the found manual, transferring this data to a new body took only a few seconds. She explained that the room they were in was directly connected to the center where new goblins were born. Roran confirmed that he now understood. The longer they fought, the stronger the goblins became. All the enemy's efforts were aimed at making the experience of the fallen a strength for the new fighters. Lapis added that when enough information had accumulated, the system created a new, more advanced version of the goblin, and these new enemies were much more dangerous than the previous ones. Soon Chuck exclaimed in surprise. One of the goblins deflected an arrow with a shield. He noticed that the goblins had started using weapons differently, and this was another alarming sign of their adaptation. Ritz, with anxiety in his voice, urged everyone to speed up before an even stronger enemy appeared. Roran immediately reported that such an opponent had already appeared. A new creature, unlike any other, stood before him, and he immediately engaged it in battle. The fight became even fiercer. He growled, cursing in his thoughts, when he realized how much this new goblin surpassed the others. Its skin was so thick that blows barely left a mark. He roared and noticed that the goblin seemed to be smiling a mocking smile, and this made him angry. He felt as if the opponent was mocking him and saw weakness in him. Rohan shouted in his soul that he would not allow himself to be judged, would not tolerate mockery, and would not admit defeat. Roran, though exhausted and with old weapons, did not stop fighting. The battle was ruthless and became only more brutal with each passing minute. Looking back, Chuck said that the rumors about the mercenary were probably true. Roran was indeed becoming the legendary mercenary about whom people had only whispered before. Though tired, Nim warned not to relax and insisted that Lauren behave worthy of his title because the situation was becoming critical. She added that the sword he fought with would soon fail. Shortly after, Ritz, glancing at the panel, anxiously called Lapis, noticing strange activity in the system. Lapis, without taking her eyes off the console, explained that she had already entered the commands to shut down the object and stop goblin production. The final step remained, but the system refused to accept the last command. Ritz got angry and demanded explanations. Lapis said the problem was simple: the system does not turn off. If she manages to turn it off completely, the previous commands will work, and the entire ruined structure will begin to collapse, and goblin production will stop forever. Ritz shouted that if the system could not be stopped through the console, then maybe it was worth just physically destroying it. Lapis replied in a heavy voice that if he could do it, there was no need to hesitate, because the system was truly incredibly durable. It had worked for hundreds of years without maintenance and was still in perfect condition. But if someone could physically destroy the mechanism, it would definitely work. Ritz silently approached, ordered Lapis to step back, and struck the system with all his might with his sword, but everything ended terribly. Ritz's sword broke, and the device remained undamaged. He roared with rage when he realized how strong the defense there was. Lapis explained that the system was covered by a magical protective spell, and ordinary physical blows did not work to destroy it. A special magical weapon was needed, without which it was impossible to break through the device. At that very moment, Lauren's sword could not withstand the pressure and finally broke. Roran pondered and replayed everything that had been said in his mind. Lapis's words about the magical protective coating captured his thoughts. He sighed deeply, realizing he had one more attempt. He sharply ordered Lapis to step away from the console, instantly pulled out the pendant that once belonged to the goblin mage, and hurled it into the very heart of the device. Suddenly in Lapis's head flashed. Before her was a necklace that once belonged to that very goblin mage. She instantly recognized the artifact, the Manadrain necklace, which gradually absorbs magical energy, stores it, and releases it at the right moment. Meanwhile, a memory suddenly flashed in Lauren's mind. He recalled that since the necklace had been in their hands after the events in the goblin lair, a lot of time had passed, and he realized during this time it could have accumulated enough magical energy. If so, there was no better moment to use it. Suddenly, a loud and powerful sound cut through the air, as if a discharge had passed through the entire building and shook the stone walls. Colts, feeling the magical shift, was surprised when he heard that the protective barrier had disappeared. There was no longer the sensation that it had simply dissolved into the air. Chuck looked around and saw more goblins approaching. He cursed fiercely, swearing at their endless stream. At that moment, Roran, wasting no time, threw his broken swords right into the very center of the control system. His action was accompanied by a sharp surge of magic from the necklace he had used earlier. Now, he channeled this energy into the attack. The system, once protected, was completely destroyed. The mechanisms inside sparked, then froze, and a powerful energy pulse swept through the room. As if on command, the goblins began to fall one by one. Their bodies went limp. Movement ceased. The entire flow was interrupted. Those approaching collapsed unconscious, as if an invisible thread connecting them to the source of life had been severed. Ritz, watching this, barely uttered that the goblins had truly stopped. Thoughts flashed rapidly in Lapis's mind. Was this really the end? She felt she could move. Her body was not paralyzed, and that was a good sign. She decided that there probably wasn't much mana in the necklace, so last time the radius of effect was smaller. And yet now it was enough to turn the tide of the battle. They miraculously survived, and she was amazed, unable to comprehend how Lauren came up with such an idea in such an extreme situation. It was unexpected even for her, but along with admiration came anxiety. She shouted at Lauren, blaming him for how dangerous it was, but her voice instantly filled with worry when she noticed he did not respond. Running closer, she saw that Lauren had fainted and fallen lifelessly to the floor. Nim noticed something strange on the goblin's body and turned her Ritz. Then came the moment when Roran slowly opened his eyes, coming to his senses after what had happened earlier. Seeing this, Lapis, with relief on her face, reported that, to her great joy, he had finally woken up, and she thanked fate for his return to consciousness. Roran, a little irritated, lightly slapped Lapis on the head, making his displeasure clear and reproaching her for being so recklessly spontaneous and bothering men without permission or reason. Lapis, a bit offended, explained that where they were, there was no convenient and accessible place to sit except what she herself decided to do. Roran, trying to stay calm, noted that even in this situation she could have simply chosen an empty spot on the bed it was quite suitable to sit on. Lapis grumbled with obvious displeasure that the bed was so hard and uncomfortable that, in her words, the buttocks would simply fall off if one sat on it for a long time. Continuing the conversation, Round decided to clarify where they were now, and judging by the surroundings, assumed it was a hospital or some medical facility. Lapis indeed confirmed his guess they were really in a hospital, and promised to tell what happened after he fainted, but first asked him to recall the last moment before losing consciousness. Rowan said that the last thing he remembered was throwing a longsword right into the device that was at the center of that clash, and Lapis gladly noted that there were no signs of memory loss or thinking problems in him, and added that his berserker state turned out to be much milder and less destructive than others in similar situations. Roran responded ironically, noting that her words seemed to imply the existence in nature of both good and bad berserker states, which in itself sounded strange. Lapis, a little surprised, confirmed that it was indeed obvious and emphasized that what happened after he threw his longsword into the device was more important. The events moved to the guild, where a representative, visibly relieved, thanked for the report on the investigation and the study of the ruins, and with sincere joy said that the whole team returned from the dangerous place alive and well. After that, he announced to the participants that they could receive their well-deserved reward from the next administrator, who stood nearby. It was also reported that the tokens the team brought from the ruins showed no hint of forgery. They were confidently recognized as authentic and established to belong exactly to those silver rank participants who had previously taken part in this task. Guild representative added that they already know the name of the leader of that other group and are organizing an additional search of the ruins to find any relics and lost artifacts that might have remained there. At the end of the conversation, he assured that everything would be resolved and asked not to worry, he would personally take care of it. On Ritz Street, one of the participants frankly admitted that he had heard the name of that mysterious man only once, and that it would be much better to hear it from the man himself. Ritz said that when they were asked to search the ruins, they barely found even one treasure or artifact worth attention, and added that after paying all the expenses for preparation and treatment after the mission, there was almost no money left. They were at zero, practically penniless. Nim, wishing to emphasize the positive, said that despite everything, they all remained alive and returned safely for her. That was the main achievement. The secti sincerely thanked for the chance to meet two strangers who turned out to be extremely useful allies in this situation. Chuck, reviewing the events in his mind, admitted that the man at the control panel turned out to be quite extraordinary, and at that moment, he even thought that the mercenary from the rumors was really standing before him. He recalled that according to legends, this person had a body like the wind, and when that wind rushed past, everything in its path was torn to pieces with terrible force. Ritz guessed that this was the mercenary nicknamed Windcutter, and assured that it was definitely not him, too famous a figure to be an ordinary bronze adventurer. Chuck countered, even if it wasn't him, it's hard to imagine that such actions as they saw could be performed by 2 or even 3 other people simultaneously. He recalled that the young man once said he was a mercenary, and that sincerely interested Ritz. Ritz said to Chuck, if you really have that much free time for fantasies, you better hurry with your treatment and return to work. Meanwhile, Lapis continued to explain. When the device was destroyed, the protective magical lock finally collapsed. She added that because of this, the built-in commands cancel and sleep were activated in the relic, and their effects immediately began to act. Lapis concluded that as a result, the ruins became completely useless and lost their original meaning, and added that the main device in them was completely destroyed. It was precisely because of a certain necklace in the construction of this mechanism that all the internal magical circles scattered and lost their power. According to her, no mage with the current level of knowledge and technology could restore or repair this device, and unfortunately for Ritz and his comrades, Lapis admitted that the reward for the task was extremely modest, so they remained dissatisfied with her group. Lapis realized that about half of what she said was a joke and should not be taken too seriously, while Roran, on the contrary, noted that given that their research yielded nothing useful, there was nothing surprising about it. He added that although the investigation was considered a failure, it was not entirely useless in his opinion. The team ultimately received a considerable reward, but Lapis still admitted she did what she should never have done under any circumstances. Lauren hesitated whether he should still apologize for what happened. Lapis was thinking completely differently. She suspected that if any strange or awkward connections appeared between them, Ritz, and the other participants, it could cause trouble. Lapis said aloud that she overheard conversations about the fact that the deactivated ruins were to be sealed later. After that, a reconnaissance team was sent there for further study. From her point of view, this place was no longer suitable for further use, and she believed it was better to be cautious than to regret short-sightedness later. To this, Roran calmly replied that everything was clear, and then asked who exactly brought him here and where their hospital was located. Lapis said reservedly that she was the one who carried him when he lost consciousness. She could not blame Ritz and the others, although they offered help because they themselves were injured, and in general, they were now in a city called Cafe. Warren grumbled irritably that it seemed he had caused a lot of trouble, and Lapis, trying to calm him down, waved her hand as if to say it was not worth it and it was not such a big deal, and by the way added that their mission to exterminate goblins had failed. Since 3 comrades never returned, they failed to destroy the goblin nest, and there was no evidence that they defeated even one goblin. All this made the defeat inevitable and natural. After these words, Rorn remembered and asked about the fate of that bag with ears. Lapis regretfully noted that apparently the bag was lost during the last battle, and Rorn reacted emotionally, clearly irritated by what happened. Lapis's thoughts again returned to the moment when, immediately after Rohan fainted, Ritz wanted to leave, because at that time there was still no certainty that the threat had completely passed. She still could not extract any material from the goblins' bodies that could serve as evidence later, and not wanting to become a burden to others, she abandoned this idea. Roran, still with disappointment in his heart, said that it was truly unfortunate. He added that at least he managed to escape alive, and despite all their efforts, they achieved nothing. He sincerely admitted, although those guys were reckless, they were not bad people, and added that Lapis was not so bad either. Lapis calmly thanked him for these words, and said hopefully that the reconnaissance group would still be able to find and rescue those girls, because they only encountered ordinary goblins. So it turned out that the team received no reward for this request, and even incurred expenses during the trip. The girl added that she had already spent money from his wallet on travel, but payment for treatment and hospital stay was a completely different matter. She said that she paid for everything out of her own pocket, hoping that one day Ron would return the money to her. Then Ron asked how long he had been unconscious. Lapis replied that he had been absent for about 3 days, counting the day of travel, so if you add the expenses for treatment and accommodation for 2 days and 1 night, it came to about 5 silver coins. She asked him not to worry and assured him that he would only have to repay the amount he owed. Without any interest, Roran hesitantly admitted that even in that case, he could not afford that sum. To this, Lapis calmly replied that she did not intend to force him to pay everything at once and was ready to allow installment payments. Roran, restraining skepticism, noted that the terms she proposed sounded too good to be true. At that moment, Lapis thought of only one thing: she had done all this deliberately. She had specifically pursued him and spent almost all her savings, ultimately ending up without money. Lapis knew that deliberately keeping him in debt was a bit cruel, but inside she felt indifferent. Finally, she openly said that in exchange for all the effort and resources spent, she wanted one thing: for Roran to agree to go with her. In Lapis's mind, one important thought concentrated. If she traveled together with this swordsman, they would meet the minimum number of party members, and this was especially important for receiving quests. In her opinion, such a partnership would be an effective way to keep intrusive and irritating companions, whom she considered parasites, at a respectable distance. Thanks to this, they would have a chance to prove that they were a full-fledged and effective group, to show others their skills and combat potential. She herself felt that although she had the strength of a representative of a demonic lineage, traveling alone, especially under the guise of a priestess, was a serious, tangible difficulty both in everyday life and in relationships with people. She realized that Roran, who had the strength of a warrior, although he knew about her true origin and that her race caused hatred in people, had not changed his attitude towards her either in behavior or in his gaze. This proved not only the strength of his spirit, but also that he could be relied upon in her thoughts. He had already become not just a combat partner, but a savior to whom she was deeply grateful. Deciding that now was not the time to discuss financial difficulties, Lapis advocated for their possible alliance. Lapis noted that traveling together with a priestess could greatly help Roran himself. She added that the deal looked fair and balanced, and, in her opinion, profitable. Roran, with a slight tone of humility in his voice, admitted that things were such that he simply had no choice. He was forced to accept this offer, especially because of his current situation, and upon hearing this, Lapis asked if his words could be considered consent, as it was important to her. Roran agreed, but immediately set one condition: he wanted their alliance to last only until he repaid her debt, which had accumulated due to expenses for his treatment, accommodation, and travel. Lapis willingly agreed to his terms and promised that everything would be exactly as he wanted. At the same time, she sincerely said that she hoped for fruitful and interesting cooperation in the future, and Roran cautiously confirmed that he also expected this, but somewhat awkwardly reminded her that it would be good if she finally stopped relying on him. That moment another thought flashed through Lapis's mind, which she concealed from herself honestly. This request worked to her advantage. While they were rummaging through the room in search of instructions and a manual, she discreetly pocketed several valuable items, and her movements were so quiet and precise that even a professional thief nearby would not have noticed anything. Most of the things she took turned out to be enchanted, and she quickly realized the medallion in their hands was most likely also from that room, so she currently had no money problems. However, she felt a little sorry for Loren. His debt to her would only grow, and she intended to take advantage of it. Despite this, Lapis felt a genuine anticipation of the adventure that awaited ahead. She quietly promised herself to stay close to Roran and walk this path with him, no matter how difficult it became. Two men stood aside quietly discussing the troubling news. One, with a worried face, reported that another village was destroyed, and the other, not too surprised, said this had happened before, clarified that it was about a pioneer settlement in the north, and added that this was no news at all. They concluded everything that is happening is directly related to the expansion of land for agriculture and the possibility of collecting even more tax as a measure that benefits only the rich. They are convinced that the same rich people are implementing plans to seize new lands, and in such a situation, they say, peasants should be protected at least a little if they are sent to such dangerous places. One of the men gloomily thought that in the endeavor, if the peasants were completely squeezed out, their houses destroyed, and they themselves perished. No one would particularly care, and both came to the shared conclusion: money rules in this world. Roran, observing their conversation, mentally agreed with this. People truly never willingly give away money, and regardless of origin, whether simple peasants, kings, aristocrats, mercenaries, or even adventurers, all strive for material wealth. Sudden surge of money from Rowan immediately made Lapis react, looked at him surprised, and somewhat mockingly remarked that it seemed he had been drinking since early morning. She, knowing that he had spent 2 days in the hospital, understood his desire to drink, though she doubted whether he had the money for it. Loren, not hiding his fatigue, admitted that his mercenary squad had been destroyed. After that, he had no choice but to become an adventurer. The first mission he agreed to turned out to be an unpleasant trial. Now it was behind him, and although he did not say directly whether it succeeded, he noted one thing: he had gained a comrade. Lapis, restraining reproach in her voice, said that drinking on an empty stomach, especially after illness, is very harmful and can cause problems, and Roran reminded that he simply has no money, so talking about drinking is pointless. Lapis, without losing her cheerfulness, said happily that of course she would pay herself, and immediately turned to the waitress to order an egg sandwich without mustard for herself and a ham one for Loren. Rowan mentally noticed that although Lapis serves the goddess of knowledge as a priestess, her mind is incredibly sharp. He even thought that she might be too intelligent for someone who is supposed to be just a spiritual servant. When Lapis asked the waitress to add everything to the common bill, Rowan thought again. He knew that she possessed both divine spells and demonic magic, and initially agreed to work with her, thinking that for a novice like him, it would be a reliable start. But now it seemed to him that everything was turning out to be much more complicated than he had imagined, and all he could do was sigh heavily. When Roran asked how much a ham sandwich cost, she said it cost the same as an egg, 15 copper coins. He sadly noticed that his debt to her was only increasing, and Lapis, without losing optimism, added that in such a case, simply sitting idly was not an option. Roran sighed mentally and was convinced. It was precisely because of constant money troubles that he became an adventurer. As soon as he met Lapis, he took the first task, ended up in the ruins of an ancient civilization, and almost died. The fight was incredibly brutal. He survived, but was left with nothing, and now all expenses fell on Lapis's shoulders. He decided to work with her until he repaid everything down to the last penny. Lapis tasted the food and with pleasant surprise said that it turned out to be incredibly tasty, and at that moment, Rowan sighed again and thought about when he would finally manage to pay off his debts. He reached for the dish and said he would try it too. Lapis politely invited him to start. Then she reminded him that although they were going to work, Roran was still unarmed. He sighed and said that the tasks he could take without a sword were simple cleaning ditches. Lapis objected. She would not allow it because such work leaves a smell, and as the one now working with him, she did not want him to smell bad. She said she had a remedy that would get rid of the unpleasant smell, and if he used it, she would not be against such assignments. Roran wondered if she would later deduct the cost of this remedy from his reward, and asked if she currently had any tasks he could take on. Lapis suggested postponing difficult topics for later and focusing on the food now, and Roran somewhat skeptically noted that those topics were not that difficult. Roran with envy. One of them noticed how cunning he was. Although he was only a copper rank adventurer, he had already found a woman who would feed him. They envied and dreamed of the same. Roran glanced at their tokens and mentally noted that it was an iron rank. Lapis, noticing that he was paying attention to those two, advised him simply not to react to their words, but Warren said that if such people are allowed to behave with impunity even once, they will definitely continue. Lapis tried to understand his position, probably just the principles of a mercenary, but still did not consider it wise to attack everyone who said something rude. Those men were not even worth attention, because they didn't even have women who would do such things for them. Her words, spoken aloud, were heard by the same two, and one of them rudely asked what exactly she had just said. Roaring's reaction was tense. A clear intention to fight appeared on his face, and he decided, if it came to this, he would fight them and, if necessary, kill. Lapis, however, said that killing made no sense. It would immediately make them criminals in the eyes of the law and the guild. She sternly reminded that 90 of misunderstandings between adventurers end in tragic consequences, so it is better to avoid escalation, and categorically insisted that no one steal from pockets. The last thing they needed was to be caught stealing in a crowded place. Roran only briefly called her in response, as if to restrain anger, and Lapis continued more calmly, adding that if a fight started they would have to pay for the damaged property of the establishment, calmly stating that she was ready to cover all expenses, and if Roran decided to destroy everything she would cover the losses without problems. Meanwhile, the two men who were watching spoke rudely, and one of them sharply and humiliatingly said that he would forgive them only if she knelt before him, because she was just a woman. They said that she, as a priestess, could be useful in many matters. One of them added that Roran had already had fun with her, and declared that now it was their turn. They were ready to resort to violence. Lapis, hearing such words, was outraged. How could they speak like that in front of an innocent girl? She called them real boors. Lapis mentally admitted, in the end, it all ended with her getting involved in a fight. Then, when the commotion subsided a bit, Lapis suggested gathering medicinal herbs, saying it was a simple and accessible way to earn at least some money. Roran gladly picked up the idea. The task was to gather medicinal herbs in the forest near the city, and he assured that there were no dangerous monsters in this area, so the quest could be completed even without weapons. Lapis explained, the guild pays 2 copper coins for each blade of grass. She estimated and said that to fully repay the debt, Roran would have to collect at least 705 plants. Roran, hearing this, asked not to worsen the already painful situation for him. Lapis replied that everything seemed quite simple, and Roran asked why she herself took up gathering herbs. Lapis explained that she also hoped to earn money this way. It would be a pity if someday she could no longer lend Roran another loan. Then, half-jokingly, she lightly scolded him for relaxing too often and missing possible herbs. Roran admitted that it was not easy for him, and added that if it were a fight he would have long since paid off the entire debt. Lapis immediately reminded him that he didn't even have a weapon to fight. Roran agreed with her, and sadly said that he probably wouldn't be able to gather much. Lapis sighed philosophically. Nothing can be done. This is a usual, constant request that always finds someone. He suggested returning, and Roran reluctantly agreed, confirming that it was time to go back. Lapis reminded them with a slight smile. The guild advises charging 30 copper coins for a hotel room, food costs from 5 to 7 copper, and a glass of drink 2 copper, so the minimum daily expenses range from 45 to 53 copper coins. Even after fulfilling the current request, Roran would still be in the red, so she suggested giving him a little more money and buying the most necessary things to at least slightly improve his situation. Roran thought aloud. In such a situation, it is really hard to imagine how adventurers of the copper rank can survive. He sincerely doubted whether they could manage at all. Lapis honestly said that most of them really live in debt, do foolish things, take risky tasks for money, and if they make mistakes, simply say goodbye to life. So in her opinion, the smartest thing is to quickly rise to the rank of iron and find a reliable, strong team. Rowan mentally decided that the world they live in is truly cruel, and involuntarily noted that mercenaries seem to feel pretty good with money. He added that this was most likely achieved thanks to the efforts of the commander and the skillful work of the accountant. Lapis said that whatever the circumstances, one still has to live somehow, and asked if she should carry her things. Roar sharply stopped her and whispered for her to be quiet. He heard someone nearby, and then Lapis stopped and suggested that maybe in this situation, it would be better for them to run away to avoid danger. Roar agreed that such a thought might make sense, but he was overcome by a strange, anxious premonition. Soon he noticed the girl and called her. Lapis noticed with surprise that it was completely unclear how she ended up in this place. Lauren suggested that perhaps she was simply lost. Lapis looked at her carefully and immediately noticed. The girl was barefoot, but there were no wounds on her feet. Her clothes were clean, so it was unlikely she came here on her own. She was not muscular. The skin on her arms and legs was soft, not roughened, and all this indicated that she was well cared for, so most likely she was from a noble family. He roared and looked around tiredly when he saw the girl, and noticed that he did not like what was happening at all. Her presence seemed strange and disturbing. Suddenly Lapis noticed movement in the trees and shouted, warning that forest wolves were attacking them. Roran took on this threat without a shadow of hesitation and promised to protect the girl for him. It was a matter of honor. He clearly said that he would deal with the wolves himself and pull the child out of danger. Lapis did not object, but strangely reminded him that he had no weapon, and without it the fight could be much more difficult. Roran confidently replied that this would not cause any problems. He stated that even without a sword, he would handle such opponents, whom he simply called dogs. A vague thought flickered in Lapis's mind from his words, and she could not believe it. Did he really just call these predators dogs? After they defeated the wolves, Roran asked with interest if they could be eaten, and Lapis calmly replied that the meat of these creatures was unsuitable for food, but the skins could be sold, and they could earn a little from that. Roran, hearing about the skins, sighed and whispered that unfortunately he had no knife and that would definitely be a hindrance. He regretted this, then looked at the girl who was still unconscious and asked how she was feeling. Lapis examined her and said with relief that there were no visible wounds on her body and that the child seemed to be fine. Lapis added that they were lucky to find her before the wolves got to her, that saved her life. Rowan thoughtfully agreed that there must be balance in life. If someone is very unlucky, then someone else, on the contrary, is in a streak of luck like this girl. And Lapis, thinking along the same lines, added that by that logic there must be a person somewhere who is currently extremely unlucky, and even wondered if they meant someone who is having a very hard time right now. Roran thoughtfully posed a practical question to himself, what to do with the girl they found. Lapis decisively answered that under no circumstances should she be left alone. Roran, though reluctantly, admitted that he did not want to drag her into the city. It could bring unnecessary problems and arouse suspicion. Lapis proposed a sensible solution. As soon as they returned to the city, they would simply hand the girl over to the guild's care, where the needed people would look after her, after which Roran approached the girl and carefully lifted her into his arms. Lapis, noticing his movement, asked what had happened, and Roran waved it off. Nothing special, just that the girl turned out to be strangely light even for a child. Lapis was a bit surprised, noticing that she looked somewhat plump, and wondered who she could be if she weighed so little despite her appearance. Roran said calmly that perhaps when the girl wakes up, she would tell everything herself, but added that they would not want anyone to think they had kidnapped her. Lapis jokingly imagined how it would sound from the outside, two suspicious people leading a defenseless girl. Roran irritably asked her at least not to count him among the most suspicious villains. In his mind, he ran through everything that had happened and realized that this very meeting with the mysterious girl had started their new adventure, full of uncertainty and trials. Roran and Lapis entered the city calmly, encountering no resistance or even a shadow of suspicion from those around them. Lapis noted that everything would have been completely different if they really were criminals. Then passing through the gates without obstacles would have been much harder, but with the priestess nearby, they walked confidently and without fear. Roran said with admiration what a miracle it was to be a priestess whom everyone respects so much. Lapis added that in such a role, people from foreign eyes give them incredible trust, which ordinary travelers do not see. They arrived in Kofa City and immediately headed to the Avengers Guild, where one of the employees was already waiting for them. The guild representative looked at them and asked if they had saved that man in the forest, about whom she had probably already been informed. Roran confirmed that everything had happened exactly like that and invited the girl to see it with her own eyes. She said that the guild would take responsibility for the found one and asked if they had any objections to such a decision. Roran replied that he had no objections. He himself did not intend to accompany this girl forever, and then the guild representative asked them to go to the guest room because she wanted to discuss certain circumstances. Roran immediately wanted to clarify one important detail and firmly stated that what happened was not a kidnapping, to which the guild representative replied that she understood perfectly because normal kidnappers would not bring the victim directly to the guild, but at the same time noted that she wanted to talk about something else and immediately got to the point. She said it awkwardly, but informed that the guild wants to temporarily restrict the movements of Roran and Lapis. Roran reacted with surprise. He clearly did not expect this. Lapis tried to find out what exactly this means and whether such actions are related to suspicions against them, and the guild representative hastily assured that nothing of the sort. No charges have been brought against them. She explained that the guild simply wants to find out who this girl is, and until there are results, Roran and Lapis should not act independently. Lapis anxiously asked if something had happened to the girl that could have caused such an approach. The guild representative admitted that she could not say anything for sure yet, and Rar wanted to know what exactly the restrictions are and how long they will last. The interlocutor replied that if exact terms are needed, it is a matter of several days, during which the first results should appear. The guild asked not to leave the city and, if possible, to stay in a certain hotel, and Roran noted that this conversation did not calm him down or ease his mind at all. The guild representative explained that the hotel is located on the main street and is called Monogotsvidea. Roran admitted that this name means nothing to him, and Lapis added with interest that Monogotsvidea is competing for the title of the best in the city, is famous for its high level of service, and is also very expensive. The guild representative added that all accommodation expenses and all amenities will be paid by the guild, and if they need anything else, they just call the guild, and it will be paid for. Roran asked suspiciously whether the guild really thinks that an adventurer can be bribed with such treatment, because too good treatment only causes distrust, and no mercenary will take on a mission just because of promises of mountains of gold. Lapis guessed that they just expected them to pretend as if they noticed nothing. Roran reminded them that this contradicts Lapis's moral principles. Lapis confirmed that he is against such treatment. Roran asked again, what exactly is happening with the girl they brought to the city? Lapis decisively replied that they will not allow their actions to be restricted without explanations, asked to at least briefly clarify the situation, and was worried whether this could somehow harm them. The guild representative replied that the likelihood of this is extremely low. Only a few people in the guild knew the girl, and to clarify the matter they will have to wait until she wakes up, and this may take several days. Lapis understood that the guild wants to make sure who this girl is, and until it is proven that Roran and he have nothing to do with it, they will be kept nearby. He was confident, as soon as the guild believes that the girl was found by accident in the forest, all suspicions will dissipate, and meanwhile they can stay at the inn at the guild's expense. Ron asked to clarify whether the guild would really take care of lodging and expenses, and the guild representative assured that everything would be taken care of, asking if they needed a room for two. Round sharply replied that they needed separate rooms, otherwise there would be no deal. He insisted that this be clearly stated. Lapis agreed with this decision, and addressing the priestess, Round once again emphasized that he was personally against cohabitation. After some time, Rowan suggested that the girl they found in the forest was most likely not local. On the contrary, she came from afar and possibly belonged to some noble family. Lapis said with obvious surprise that it was strange how she ended up alone in the middle of a forest, without villages and safe roads, and he was curious about what could have really happened to her. He added that for now they could only enjoy the comfort of the expensive hotel and patiently wait for the people from the guild to get in touch, and also asked, "Are you tired, satellite?" Roran, instead of a direct answer, admitted that he did not like what was happening at all, and the sensations in his body were unpleasant too, as if he could not even properly tense up. He added that it was not due to excessive tension, but his whole body felt limp and uncontrollable. Hearing this, Lapis suggested that, although Roran's mind had already returned to normal, his body had not yet recovered from recent events. Roran briefly hesitated, unsure whether to agree. 2 days passed. A girl from the guild approached them and said that the guild had proven their innocence, so all restrictions on their movement were lifted. She warmly thanked them for their cooperation and said that now they could act as they saw fit. Lapis was surprised by such brevity and asked with surprise why he was not told what exactly had happened. The guild representative explained that the decision to provide information was made by the guild itself, and such information was given only to selected adventurers of iron rank and above. Lapis sharply objected, reminding that they were the ones who brought the girl to the guild, and that whatever the information was, they deserved an explanation. At that moment, Roran stopped his companion, interrupting her attempt to insist, and Lapis reacted with surprise to his intervention. Roran explained that his companions serve the god of knowledge, and by nature strive to learn even what is usually hidden, and the guild representative, a bit embarrassed, admitted that she had heard of those who are relentlessly driven to find the truth, but reminded that the final word belongs to the guild. Rowan quietly nodded and said he understood she could say nothing, so there was no point in insisting. He also asked if this had already been passed on to those who needed it, and if at least that way they could find out. The guild representative confirmed that they had already identified the circle of people who could be trusted with this information, and it had been passed on. Ravrin concluded. If they are recognized as innocent, they are free and can leave, so he decisively announced that he would leave the hotel today. Lapis tried to stop him, and the guild representative thanked them for their cooperation and officially ended the guild's involvement in the matter. Lapis, clearly worried, wanted to know exactly what he planned. Roran explained that the girl should not be pressured. Even under pressure, she would remain silent, and if she accidentally spoke, it would be very bad for her. He added that trying to talk to someone ordered to be silent is a much bigger hassle, so it is better to address the one who has the right to share information, and Lapis asked if Roran knew exactly whom to go to. Roran confidently said he knew the name and face of the person he needed, so they would quickly sort it out. Lapis grabbed Warren's hand, not hiding her admiration. Warren tried to object, but Lapis, looking him straight in the eyes, explained that she did not know where to go, so he would have to lead her himself. Do not hesitate, act quickly. Rurin entered one of the city's establishments and began asking locals, gathering the necessary information. After some time, Rowan returned to a familiar man and said he had not seen him for a long time, although not much time had passed. He suggested sitting down and continuing the conversation. The man named Chuck looked at them in surprise and asked how they had even found this place. Roran replied that they had to keep asking people along the way. Lapis added that it had cost them 30 coppers, but the expense was necessary, so she paid herself, then greeted Chuck and smiled, saying she had not seen him for a long time. Chuck recognized the interlocutors, nodded to show he understood, and asked his sister to bring 2 more mugs of ale. Roran declined the treat, although he said he was still grateful for the offer. Chuck insisted, explaining that they had helped him a lot, and he wanted to at least treat them to something as a token of gratitude. Lapis replied that they had done almost nothing, and all previous efforts had gone to waste, and Chuck snapped back. Don't talk nonsense, the money really disappeared, but that happens. The main thing is that we are alive, and that's already good. He admitted that he couldn't say, as if it didn't annoy him, but everything was already in the past, so there was no point in worrying. Then he raised a toast to the meeting, and Roran apologized, probably because of that situation or because he couldn't join the toast. Chuck said that he was fine and not offended. He noted that it looked like they didn't just come to chat about trifles, and asked why they were looking for him in the first place. Roran explained that a few days ago, they found a girl in the forest and took her in. Chuck, surprised, recognized that it was them, and recalled that this matter had already been discussed in the guild, but only among those who had iron rank and above. Then he understood why they came to him specifically. Ravrin explained that his partner wanted to learn at least a little about that girl. Chuck responded with understanding, reminding her that he was a silver rank adventurer, and in his opinion, no one should expect him to just go and tell her everything he knew. He added that second-rate adventurers who like to boast about their deeds usually don't reach silver rank. Roran explained that he did not expect such frankness at all, but after consulting with his partner, they decided, if anyone could sell them such information, it was Chuck. Chuck, hearing this, reminded them that Rohan saved his life and offered a compromise. He was ready to tell if they promised not to reveal the source, and Rohan promised not to cause Chuck any trouble. Lapis confirmed that she would keep her word, thanked him, and addressed him as Sir. Chuck praised their position, but immediately warned that he could not vouch for the truthfulness of the information and advised them to decide for themselves what to do with it. Then he shared what he knew. According to his data, the girl they brought was named Sena Lombarsha, and she was from the city-state of Hansa. Roar lingered on the name Hansa, trying to comprehend what he heard, and Lapis explained that the city-state of Hansa lay about 3 days' journey south of Kaffa. It was a small country with the same name capital, and although she had never heard the name Sena, the surname Lombarsha belonged to the ruling family of that land. Roran was surprised at how much Lapis knew. She laughed cheerfully and asked if he didn't want to praise her too. Chuck continued, Sena was the only daughter of the ruling family, and although their position was not very brilliant, it would be inappropriate to be rude. Roran decided to find out why they were not allowed to move when they first brought the girl. Chuck explained that the reason was simple. Gil did not want them to tell everything too early. A lonely noblewoman found in the middle of the forest will be immediately noticed and a wave of rumors will follow. He added that usually, when helping people, one can expect a reward, but this time no one will receive anything. Firstly, no one asked for help. Secondly, there is no one to confirm whether this girl is really Sena. Lapis assumed that in 2 days it would be possible to find out who she really is. He even said that no one reported anything to him, but he felt that Gilt Whispered's girl might be real. The messenger sent to Hansa had not yet returned, and Roran assumed that perhaps he simply had not made it in time. Only 2 days had passed. Lapis recalled that the organization's couriers usually carried magical devices that showed their location, and assumed that the connection with him had probably been lost. He also added that the guild clearly decided, the Hanseatic League is not the kind of partner worth paying much attention to, but they did not want to anger it either, so they gathered several squads of Iron Rank adventurers and were going to send the girl back with them. Pravana has officially asked to be returned to the Hanseatic League. He added that the pay was small, so the Silver Rank adventurers refused, and Lauren noted that he believed there was nothing particularly sensitive in that information. Chak agreed, but noted that this is a purely internal matter, which is usually not shared. The guild did not tell them everything just because they were of copper rank. Lapis wondered what would have to be done to gain access to such information. Chak skeptically shook his head and hinted that it might not only be a matter of rank. Lapis, with a slight smile, noted that her interest was caused only by ordinary human curiosity, because indeed there is nothing strange in wanting to know how a member of an aristocratic family, who lived in luxury and seemed protected from all troubles, ended up completely alone in the middle of a wild forest 3 days' journey from her home. She enthusiastically added that it was not surprising to want to understand everything down to the smallest details. Roran noted that with their current bronze rank, none of the guild leadership would invite them to such talks. Lapis suggested that perhaps there was a way to bypass this restriction. Some claimed it was impossible, but Chuck, overhearing their conversation, intervened and said that such a method does exist. Lapis became curious and wanted to find out what this method was. Chuck explained that in special cases, when a silver rank adventurer gives an official recommendation, a copper adventurer can temporarily be considered an iron participant. Especially if Ritz sends such a request on his own behalf and adds a personal recommendation from Chuck and his comrades, the participation of Roran and Lapis in this matter would be quite possible. Lapis enthusiastically began to say that this was a great opportunity, but Roran interrupted her. He wanted to make sure that Chuck was truly confident in this decision, because if it fails, both the place and his reputation will suffer. Chuck responded lightly and confidently, reassuring him there would be no problem. He added that Ritz would most likely say the same. He emphasized that everything was voluntary and no one would be forced if Roran did not want to. But if he decided, Chuck would like him to first get himself a good weapon. Roran began to look for excuses, saying that first he needed to deal with the weapon, and only then return to the conversation about the proposal, so he asked Chuck for some time he would try to settle everything in one day. Chuck said with a mocking laugh that Roran was a real weakling and behaved like a henpecked husband, and Roran grumbled that he knew everything perfectly well. Chuck concluded that if Roran really came up with something in a day, they could return to the conversation. He reassured him that the Silver Travelers would not go on this mission, so there should be no problem with their recommendation. Roran said that he trusted him, and immediately approached Lapis to ask for some money. Lapis, raising an eyebrow in surprise, asked if he was going to buy a weapon, maybe some big sword, and Roran replied that if that were the case, he would not bother Chuck and the others. Lapis, suddenly switching to a business tone, asked Chuck when exactly this job would be sent. Chuck shrugged. There was no exact data, he said. Everything would depend on the condition of the girl herself, and he also muttered that he had heard about an approximate date somewhere in about 3 days. Lapis, understanding what she heard, apologized to Roran and said that she could lend him some money, but asked to wait a little, because she was afraid she did not have enough cash and would have to get more. Roran replied that he would decide this later and wait, because she needed time, and Lapis immediately said that she was ready to get to work. Chuck jokingly said that Roran had no urgent matters and could stay because it was hard for both of them. They had fallen in love with very unusual women. Roran asked restrainedly on what basis such an assumption was made. Chuck, with a light wave of his hand, said that he understood everything perfectly because he had been in a similar situation himself. He admitted that Nim always picked on him, knowing how he felt, but after thinking it over, he concluded that being under the thumb of this grumbling woman with a flat butt was not so bad. But even her bad temper became part of her charm. Roran smiled and thought that as soon as she hears this, he would quickly be turned into a hedgehog. The next day Lapis entered the room and, not believing her eyes, saw that they seemed to have spent the whole night there. Nim appeared nearby and asked where Chuck was. Lapis greeted her and with a light nostalgia noted that quite some time had passed since they last saw each other, and Nim smiled and replied that it really wasn't that long. Lapis sincerely apologized for completely forgetting to find a new place to live after their breakup, said that she had already rented a suitable place and moved all her things, so there was nothing to worry about, and added that Mr. Roran didn't have many things, so the move went quickly. Roan thanked her but was constantly wondering how she even got into his room, and Lapis explained that she said they were partners, and she was immediately let in, so Roan mentally wondered if that was normal at all, and assumed they might have been let in precisely because they acted on behalf of the guild. Meanwhile, Nim addressed Chuck to wake him up. Noticing this, Lapis asked if she came specifically for Chuck, and Nim confirmed yes, she came exactly for that, to take away, as she said, the worthless man. Warren explained that they were just sitting there together, and mentally noted that most of the time he was just listening to Chuck's love story. Nim, turning back to Lauren, said that he was a good person and advised Lapis to take him as an example. Lapis, frowning, asked if that meant she was bad. Nim left it to her judgment, and added that there was nothing to worry about. She herself would explain to Ritz that Chuck was just bragging in front of less experienced comrades, promised to pay for everything necessary, and said goodbye. Roran, watching her walk away, said that maybe they should apologize later. Lapis was a little embarrassed and reminded that she already said it was all right, but then added, was she really that bad? Roran replied that he would not take it upon himself to judge and did not consider it necessary to discuss. Lapis looked around, assessed the situation, and strongly advised Roran to go to the weapons shop. They needed to buy both weapons and armor, because no adventurer acts properly without reliable equipment, and his things were in a miserable state. The armor was noticeably worn and battered. It was time to replace it with new ones. Roran, with a barely noticeable nostalgic whistle in his voice, said that he had been using his equipment since his mercenary days. It had always served him well, and Lapis assured him that they would find what he needed and asked him to trust her completely. In the armory, Lapis immediately took the initiative, addressed Roran, and reminded him that he specialized in attacks. So in her opinion, he needed to look for more reliable, stronger armor, not just simple leather. She immediately pointed to one item I had advised buying, and Roaring, looking at her, noticed with surprise it didn't look like armor at all. Lapis explained that although it looked like an ordinary cloak, it was actually a magical artifact made from fabric woven from black widow spider silk, which endowed it with extraordinary strength and unique properties. She said with a sparkle in her voice that the item was enchanted with protection and self-repair spells, and it cost only 5 gold, 10 times cheaper than the market price. According to Lapis, if you put this cloak over ordinary leather armor, the protection would increase significantly, so she confidently decided that they definitely should buy it. Roran asked in surprise, was the item really worth 10 times more, or was that an exaggeration, and did the seller really say so? Lapis explained that the main problem was that the sellers themselves often did not know the true value of some items. She added that perhaps even the owner did not understand how valuable this item was, and even if that became clear later, the main thing was to manage to buy it before someone decided to change the price, because the price tag was still there. Lapis continued speaking, but suddenly her words were cut off. One of the items she had seen earlier simply disappeared. She turned to the seller and asked where the item she was interested in had gone, thinking it had probably already been bought. The shop owner quickly waved her off, saying that no one had bought that item yet. According to him, it was too large for the sales floor, so he had taken it to the storeroom, and Lapis noted with some surprise that he could do that. The owner waved his hand strangely and admitted that several people had helped here. It would be impossible for one person to handle such a task. When Lapis heard this, she eagerly offered to retrieve the item back, but the owner stopped her, warning that handling such technology was not so simple and that it would take time. Meanwhile, Roran mentally noted that despite the rather modest size of the shop, there was indeed a good selection of goods here. He thought as soon as extra money appeared he could buy a spare weapon, but he understood that when exactly such an opportunity would arise was unknown. His gaze stopped on a longsword that seemed quite decent to him. And at that very moment, a man entered the room with a confident stride, whose appearance instantly drew the attention of everyone present. He appeared in the shop, sharply shouted at Roran, and demanded that he take his hands off the sword, because he himself had long set his eyes on this weapon. The man arrogantly admitted that Roran had a taste for quality, but emphasized that such a weapon was not suitable for a simple muscular bumpkin, advised Roran to first study his combat skills before taking on such equipment, and then declared that he would take the sword for himself. The shop owner politely thanked him for the purchase and for visiting, while Roran, inwardly admitting that he did not have the money to buy it anyway, wondered who was standing before him. Lapis approached him, noticing his gloom, and asked if something had happened. Roran waved it off and said everything was fine, and when Lapis noticed that the sword that had just been on display was gone, she thought with surprise that perhaps the longsword had already been bought. She smiled and said the sword was nice, but she already had something much more suitable prepared for him. Handing over another sample, she added that although it was impressive, it was still significantly inferior to the one she had chosen for Lauren. At that moment, Roran could not help but be surprised. Seeing the sword, he was amazed that Lapis had managed to find such a rare specimen. It truly was a marvelous weapon worthy of the strongest adventurers. Lapis calmly enumerated the expenses. New leather armor 50 silver coins, magical coat 5 gold, the sword itself 15 gold. They also bought potions, a spare dagger, and various useful items, and as a result, the debt amounted to 23 gold and 80 silver coins. Lauren thought to himself that at least Lapis had forgiven him that bronze coin, and that was already good, and he joked that it seemed now, besides his equipment and personal belongings, he himself was gradually becoming her property. Lapis soothingly said that adventurer's equipment always belongs to him personally, so there was no need to worry, and reminded him that they had a new mission tomorrow, so it was worth resting well today. She said good night. Lauren showed her where her room was. Lapis thought irritably that she should have taken a double room after all, and should not have listened to Lauren's advice. He replied dryly that she should not start talking about her fears, and advised her simply to go to sleep. Lauren, preparing to fall asleep, thought that this would be his second mission as an adventurer, and was sure such a request would attract a bunch of experienced fighters. Maybe they didn't quite reach the level of Ritz's squad, but among them there would definitely be adventurers of iron rank. He hoped that a good squad would come out of this. The next morning at the Adventurers Guild, one of the girls called Lauren to the main hall so that he could confirm his participation and register. In the hall, he immediately noticed the arrogant guy from yesterday's weapon shop. Recognizing Roran, he shouted at him indignantly, "Yesterday's fool." Roar mentally realized at that moment that his hopes for a calm and professional team seemed to be shattered. The guy sarcastically remarked that now, supposedly, iron adventurers have completely depreciated because they take anyone, looked at the bronze pendant on Roran's neck, and with obvious surprise said that this request was for participants not lower than iron rank. Guild members standing nearby calmly explained that Ron and Lapis had an official recommendation from a silver rank adventurer. That guy couldn't hide his surprise when he heard this. The guild member continued, passionately explaining that according to guild rules, such a recommendation equates copper rank to iron, so Rowan and Lapis have full right to participate in this request. Roran, still chewing everything inside himself, thought that the guy was unlikely to start saying he had connections, but he still repeated as he said before that Roran should know his place. He sincerely admitted that he himself did not understand how he got so lucky, but advised to be careful and try not to bother others. Roran calmly nodded and promised that he would try not to interfere and keep to himself. The guy awkwardly shook his head. He was expecting something more. One of the guild members intervened and urged everyone to calm down, reminding them that the task requires teamwork, and that guy exploded with indignation. He was equated to someone like Lauren. The representative intervened and noted that the least he could do was simply not to interfere. She warned that if his actions hindered the request, the guild would impose a penalty on him. She also reminded that the guild saw no problems with the participation of Roran and Lapis, as their abilities were confirmed by silver rank adventurers. If they were an obstacle, they would have been punished, but if Frank was so important to him, the opinion of someone with a silver rank should matter to him. Roran, having listened to all this, calmly confirmed that he understood. The guild representative added that participation in such a request was an exception and warned that no one should cause problems. Roran once again confirmed that he was aware of the responsibility. The representative looked at him and noticed. At first she thought he just had connections, but now she felt that he truly deserved the title Iron-ranked adventure. She was glowing with joy and then announced that the briefing was about to start, but first they needed to make sure all participants were present. Roran turned to Lapis and said in surprise that she had been silent the whole time. Hayakam Lapis replied with a barely noticeable smile that arguing with such people was a waste of time, so she simply stuck to her own. Roran briefly agreed. The representative announced there were 23 participants in total. She sincerely thanked everyone for their participation and announced that this request was a commission from the Adventurers Guild, the goal of which was to escort a girl named Sina Lombarsha to the city-state of Hansa. The representative solemnly announced that the girl named Sina was the daughter of the ruler of the city-state of Hansa, and in connection with this, she insisted that every participant in the request treat her with due respect and reverence. The guild already knew in advance that the road to Hansa was 3 days, so they put everyone in horse-drawn carriages to travel quickly and safely, and the escort had one main task, to guard and protect along the entire way. She anxiously explained that the guild had previously sent messengers to Hans to warn him during the approach, but unfortunately none returned, and there was no communication, so they were ordered to be extremely careful when passing this route. Due to the increased risk, the guild established a payment of 12 silver coins for each quest participant, but one of the adventurers doubted its sufficiency, hinting that in dangerous conditions this was too little. The representative calmly replied that the threat level was not yet officially confirmed, so the amount was preliminary. She assured that if the real danger turned out to be higher than expected, the reward would be reviewed and increased. So the participants did not need to worry about the pay, it would depend on the level of risk. Roran mentally noted that although the adventurers sent earlier had still not returned, the guild still gave no guarantees, and probably it would be necessary to provide evidence to receive an additional bonus. He considered the conditions extremely difficult and completely unprofitable. The guild representative continued the briefing, reminding that this request had the status of an official guild order. She warned that participants could refuse but would have to pay a fine for that, and if the task succeeded, then besides the assigned reward, everyone would receive special privileges from the guild. She urged take the task seriously and take full responsibility. Sina herself, apparently nervous, stepped forward and in a pleading voice asked the escorts to take her home. She admitted that she could not promise anything yet, but would definitely tell her father about what happened and ask him to additionally reward the escorts. After that she bowed low, sincerely thanking and full of hope. Lapis asked for the contract without hesitation. Roran thought that this mission was extremely risky, but he was sent here by personal recommendation, so he could no longer refuse. The next morning on the day of departure, Lauren, watching the preparations, was surprised to notice that they too would travel by carriages. Lapis explained that on foot they wouldn't make it in 3 days, and she herself had never participated in escorts before. She was impressed that the guild managed to organize horse-drawn carriages in just one day, a true display of their administrative power, and sincerely admired Lauren's physical condition and how easily he carried his heavy sword. Warren replied that he had long been accustomed to the weight of the weapon. Lapis reminded him that he was also carrying a lot of other equipment. Warren agreed and asked how best to arrange everything overall. Lapis answered that there were 3 carriages in total because 23 adventurers took part in the mission. 8 fighters rode in the first, Sina herself and 7 other travelers in the second, and in the third, where she and Ron went, the remaining 8 were. The guy from the guild who was in charge of the dispatch shouted for everyone to board quickly. Delay was already happening. Roran agreed without argument. He thought to himself, probably, I am too heavy for this cart. The coachman, noticing that the carriage was tilting, shouted that it was overloaded on one side, and it was impossible to travel in such a state. Lapis carefully examined the situation and said there was nothing to be done, would have to move from this side to the opposite one, and one of the adventurers protested, unhappy that because of this they would have to squeeze together. Roran bowed his head and apologized, admitting that he had nothing to say in his defense. Several adventurers just calmly shrugged. When it became clear that he could do nothing, one offered to help carry the luggage, and another admitted that his equipment was too heavy, so he also took up helping. Their actions finally leveled the carriage, and Warren sincerely thanked everyone. One of the fighters said, "We are all on the same team and must help each other as much as possible. After all, this is the essence of teamwork." Roran noticed with surprise that there really were good people among them, but the brief feeling of calm quickly melted away. After a few hours on the road, Roran, noticing something troubling, turned to Lapis and asked what was going on here. Lapis, surveying the situation, bitterly realized she could not make an exact diagnosis, but she was sure before them was a dead body. What seemed like a simple escort mission suddenly turned into a sinister and frightening event, full of ominous premonitions. Roran felt a burden inside and asked himself a troubling question. Why did this happen? Why did everything turn out this way? His memories took him back a few hours, to the moment when the events had just begun to unfold. Roran then politely apologized for the inconvenience caused, hoping that his apology would help settle everything. One of the men nearby sharply turned to him. He was outraged that Rogan could not settle in the carriage and was thus disturbing others. Irritation was felt in his voice, and he could not hold back, accusing Rogan of deliberately putting a spoke in the wheel. Roran sighed to himself, realizing he had again gotten into an unpleasant mess, irritably thought about why this man was picking on him again, was about to respond, but as soon as he began to speak, another adventurer interrupted him and rudely ordered him to be silent. He insisted that the guild had already explained everything, and sharply ordered him to go to the carriage, not continuing the conversation. Roran mentally noted that this guy, surrounded only by girls, seemed like a typical popular one, some kind of fashionable and very sought after. Lapis thanked one of the participants for help and addressed him. Bros Roran quietly repeated his name, and Bros, not hiding his displeasure, grumbled that he simply did not like those who talked too much. Roran was surprised that Lapis knew his name. Lapis quickly explained that the guild had given a list of all quest participants in advance, and she had memorized the names, adding that Rose was an iron rank adventurer who had been working in the field for 20 years. Rose asked with irony if she was trying to hurt him, and Lapis, remaining polite, assured that she had no such intention at all and emphasized, among numerous adventurers, only a few managed to reach the silver rank. And despite 20 years in the business, Bros has never been seriously injured. His skill and experience command deep respect. After the speech, she smiled and asked if her praising tone embarrassed him, and Bro, irritated, sharply replied that she was too loud and advised to sit quieter. At that moment, a guild representative ordered the coachman to prepare to depart. One of the coachmen loudly announced that it would take them 3 days to reach the Hansa. A brief, safe travels passed among the adventurers, and the company set off. Later, as the sun was setting, Roran noticed the darkness approaching, and Bros said that going further in the dark could be dangerous, so they soon needed to find a place to set up camp. But suddenly, the wagon ahead stopped abruptly, and Bros doubted it was an ambush. Everything looked unlike an attack, so he assumed that perhaps something technical had happened to the wagon. Lauren felt a strange, tense atmosphere ahead and decided to go find out what was going on there. He approached the coachman and tried to find out what was happening. At first, the coachman replied that everything was fine, but then admitted that he felt very nauseous and was experiencing some internal discomfort. Roran anxiously asked if the passengers in the carriage were okay. The coachman assured him that they should be fine. At that moment, Bros came closer and shouted to Roran, asking what was happening. Roran replied that the coachman had fallen ill, and Bros, becoming wary, addressed the coachman himself and demanded explanations. A voice sounded asking for help and also reminded, before setting up camp, don't forget to spread out the mats. Lauren, still not understanding what was happening, returned to the people in the carriage and asked if everyone was okay, called for someone to answer, and when he heard no clear response, began opening the doors to see with his own eyes. Lauren shouted to Lapis with sharp anxiety in her voice, insisting that she come immediately. Lapis, approaching the scene, immediately began to examine. She noticed an irregular pulse and heavy, labored breathing in the victims and immediately understood. The people needed to be pulled out of the carriage at once, or their condition could worsen. Regarding Ms. Senna, Lapis said that she seems to be simply in a deep sleep, and there are no signs of health deterioration. At that moment, one of the adventurers, Kraz, abruptly intervened in the course of events, aggressively demanded explanations, accused Rohan of holding back the entire squad, did not hide his indignation, and demanded an answer here and now. Roran focused briefly and decisively apologized, said he had no time for talks and advised Krasius to prepare the camp, then called Brosis and asked him to help, while Krasius, confused, did not understand what was happening. The boys ran up, trying to understand the essence of the panic, and Kras rudely brushed him off in response. Bros, having found out whether the priest had medical skills, turned his gaze to Lapis, and Lauren, without hesitation, confirmed that the matter was indeed serious. Meanwhile, Lapis conducted her preliminary medical analysis. One of the men suddenly began to lose strength and suffocate, although there were no signs of illness or visible injuries. The symptoms screamed of strange, unusual exhaustion that could not be explained by ordinary fatigue, and Lapis bitterly admitted that she could not determine the exact cause of death of these two. In these people, the heart and breathing suddenly stopped simultaneously without any signs of illness or visible injuries, as if they simply died without an apparent reason. The gathered adventurers reacted indignantly. They could not believe that the bodies were truly dead according to them. Everyone was perfectly fine in the morning, and these supposedly dead ones were just riding in a carriage and did not differ from the others. Rose, seeing the reaction, could not contain his anger and shouted loudly and confusedly, "What is happening here?" Lapis, remaining calm, suggested he check her words himself. Rose approached the bodies, examined one of them, and confirmed that the man was indeed dead. Lapis nodded. Both bodies were in a state of irreversible death, and Roran, observing all this, thought that now he had to act extremely cautiously. Lapis did not waste time and decisively proposed to burn the bodies immediately. Bros was surprised and did not understand why they could not simply be buried, and Lapis explained that under such circumstances burial was unacceptable. If the participants are categorically against cremation, she says the only alternative is an immediate return to the city of Kaffa. Rose asked why such extreme measures were necessary. Lapis explained that there was a high probability the dead would soon turn into the undead. Roran, hearing this, exclaimed with shock in his voice that it was impossible. Turning into the undead usually happens through necromancy or a curse. Lapis explained that sometimes the dead really do return as the undead, not due to external interference, but because of the same attachment to their previous life, and added that now the important thing was not the cause of death, but how to properly lay the bodies to rest. If the participants doubted her words, she suggested consulting another priest and pointed to a group of adventurers that included Cross, a knight named Layla, a mage named Angie, and a priestess of the water god named Loro. Lapis admitted that she did not know all of Laura's abilities, but just looking at her it was clear, a true priestess who could say something on the matter. Cress, remaining calm, said that Lapis could do whatever she wanted, but she should not interfere with their group. Hearing what was happening, Loru calmly reminded that priests must escort the souls of people and have no right to leave them without a ritual. She appealed to her water god, begging him to show the way and open the path for the dead. Lauren looked at her and noticed that she really looked like a true priestess. Lapis, hearing this, smiled and jokingly asked if she herself did not look like a priestess, and Bros, without responding to this remark, asked what conclusions she had reached. Loru carefully examined the bodies and reported that they were already desecrated and would soon indeed turn into the undead. Roran was shocked by what he heard and, struggling with anxiety, realized the terrible seriousness of what was happening. The brothers, looking at those gathered, said gloomily that the situation was extremely difficult and nothing could be changed anymore, so he suggested first of all to set up camp before dark and then to start burning the bodies. Roran took the initiative, said that the bodies should be moved aside and asked for help, reminding that these were comrades and friends of the dead, so at least out of respect for their memory, they should be given this last honor. Later, one of the adventurers, barely holding back emotions, said that what was happening was incomprehensible. There was no battle, no one was hurt in the skirmish, so he did not understand why their comrades suddenly became undead. He firmly believed the matter was in the carriage itself, because the dead were traveling in the second one, which was provided by the guild. The traveler added that after the trip in this wagon, only Sena felt well. For everyone else, everything went awry. Tension was growing with every moment. and Lapis, looking around carefully, said decisively that it was really becoming dangerous here. Several adventurers could not hide their fear looking at that sin. In their voices pulsed anxiety and uncertainty. They said they felt real horror and asked each other not to look in her direction, because her gaze seemed frightening and ominous to them. Lapis, hearing this, calmly and confidently said that everyone was free to act as they saw fit. Lauren, hesitating a little, wanted to clarify if she was really sure about this. Lapis looked at him warmly and said that she had no reason to stop or interfere. She admitted that her only sincere wish was to be near and walk alongside in all his adventures. She expressed hope that someday he would confess the same to her. According to Lapis, she had never tried to restrain his initiative or interfere in what he considered right, so now she asked him to continue following his own choice. Roran, hearing this, calmed down. He felt that there was no way back, and to some extent it was no longer worth returning. With a slight smile, he turned to Senna and greeted her. Then, trying to be friendly, he invited her to join them at the table. He noted that food always tastes worse when eaten alone. Sina, lowering her gaze a little embarrassed, refused, said she was not hungry at all. Roaring quickly apologized so as not to hurt her feelings, and gently added that she still should eat a little. There was another hard day ahead, and she would need strength, and Senna nodded in agreement, but anxiety crept into her voice. Would her presence become a burden for them? Rowan, trying to calm her, said there was no reason to worry. His friend had already fully agreed and had no objections, and Sina relaxed a little, thanking him and adding that then she would allow herself to move a little and keep them company. At that moment, Crasses sarcastically interrupted the conversation, suggesting how exactly Roran managed to get close to the silver rank adventurer, hinting at brown-nosing. In his opinion, that's how those who beg for a good recommendation or suck up for extra reward behave, and he said mockingly that it was clear to everyone why Roran was doing this. Roran quietly cursed to himself. He realized that he was again forced to endure Crassus' annoying nitpicking, and no matter how much he tried to persuade him with words, nothing changed. Irritation was already rising inside him. He wanted to grab something heavy and throw it at him to stop this stream of senseless anger. He didn't care what crows said about him personally, but he absolutely did not want Senna to hear even one harsh word from his lips. Praxis said there was no reason for Roran to come closer. Roran, not letting him finish, calmly covered Sina's eyes with his hand and, to distract attention, went to get firewood. Lapis, not hiding her irritation, took the initiative. She threw a log with all her might right at Crow's, not letting him finish, and at that moment Rowan noticed to himself that the blow hit him right in the head. Layla, cross-friend and companion, indignantly addressed them, not understanding what was happening and why it was necessary. Roran returned the log with a half-smile and said he wanted to know if he could now look at her. Lapis answered decisively and with full confidence in herself, and explained that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. Then in a decisive voice, she asked Lauren not to delay and to bring Miss Senna to them as soon as possible. Rose, the organizer of the group, briefly addressed the gathered adventurers. They held a general meeting and by consensus decided to continue to the city of Hansa with the same group, not returning to Kaffa. Among the adventurers, a whisper was heard. One of them, with philosophical calm, said that he had understood the risk all along and now simply received what he had prepared for, noting that those who were already dead would receive no reward. He himself was not against continuing the mission, but categorically stated that he was not going to travel next to a girl named Sena. Brow, slightly irritated, admitted that this was indeed a problem. Roran, observing the scene, thought he could understand such a reaction, although he did not like it. Lapis suggested another way out. She and Roran could travel by carriage with Sena. She explained that the night passed quietly. She and Roran deliberately settled near Sena's tent so that she would not be lonely, and they were with her all the time. According to Lapis, they spent a long time together, and Roran showed no signs of illness. Roran assured that he felt completely well. Hearing this, Bros asked if they were ready to travel with her in the carriage, and Roran replied that they had spent the whole night with her, and if something was wrong with her, it would have already shown itself. Bros sincerely thanked them for this decision, and emphasized that it would be a great service to the whole group, because leaving a client without escort was extremely undesirable. He then asked if there were enough remaining carriages for the adventurers who stayed, but added with a bitter smile that after recent events, no one would agree to ride in that dark carriage. He insisted that any change in condition or incident be reported immediately, emphasizing that if trouble happened to them, it would not make life easier for others. Lapis was the first to greet Sena. Sena looked at them and, restrained but with warmth in her voice, addressed them, calling them brother and sister. Roran approached and suggested going together. He also addressed the coachman and asked if he felt okay. The coachman, hesitating, confirmed that he felt acceptable. Rowan mentally realized that the driver still looked unwell. Although it was only the second day of the journey, many problems had already arisen. Most adventurers were depressed and broken in spirit, and he felt that something serious was bound to happen ahead. Bros, having ordered to take their places, turned to Rorn and Lapis and sternly warned them, from now on guard and even more vigilant. Sina, her voice trembling slightly with anxiety, sought reassurance and asked if everything would be all right. Lapis smiled and assured that everything would be fine. Their group had a very strong mercenary, and Roran asked in surprise if it was him. Lapis smiled and replied that, of course, it was about him. There was no other guy in their squad who was called Windcutter. Roran replied, somewhat embarrassed, that one should not deceive oneself. He was not the person called that. He added that he was often mistaken for him, but he himself had no nickname, and Lapis asked with interest if he knew the real Windcutter. Roran whispered that he personally did not know him, because whoever met that person on the battlefield did not return alive. He himself always watched very carefully not to end up among those fighting him. Lapis asked with a hint of mockery if he was often called not very clever. Roran honestly admitted that it happened, and Lapis nodded, calmly deciding that perhaps he really was not very clever. A few more hours passed, and Lapis, who was beginning to get bored, noticed that nothing interesting had happened all this time. The driver said that soon they would look for a place to stop and rest. Lauren, looking at the road, noted to himself how quickly time had flown. Suddenly, the coachman loudly noticed that someone was standing ahead on the road and assumed that they were probably just ordinary travelers. Rowan agreed to come and check the situation, and Bros, who was following, quickly explained what had happened. Rowan saw that people really stood right in the middle of the road and blocked the way, but there was something completely wrong in their behavior and appearance. Roran, looking more closely, noticed that at first glance they looked like ordinary townspeople, but there was something disturbing about it. There should have been no villages or towns here. One of the adventurers, outraged by the delay, loudly addressed those standing in the way, demanding they step aside, and emphasized that their actions were hindering progress. Lauren, watching what was happening, felt anxiety and warned everyone that there was clearly something wrong with these people, asking them to be especially careful. And at that very moment, the irreparable happened. One of the people standing on the road suddenly bit the adventurer. When the road suddenly fell into chaos, the adventurers reacted in horror. One shouted for the attacker to release his comrade. Panic grew. No one could understand why the person who looked ordinary clung so tightly and with such fury. Rose immediately rushed to help free the stuck object in the man, but he himself had to make considerable effort. He looked at the scene puzzled, acknowledged that something was wrong with these people, and began to doubt whether they were even alive. At that moment, Loru, servant of the god of water, said clearly and confidently that those standing before them were the undead. Rose recoiled from surprise and admiration. It was daytime, and the sun was shining brightly outside, so this could not have happened. He ordered everyone to take combat positions. Crass, full of confidence, said that zombies were no match for him. Layla, standing nearby, quickly urged him not to go too far ahead. Angie, restrained and prudent, reminded that her magical energy was limited and asked if Crass was sure he would not need help. Rose nodded and let him go, but at the same time noted to Lore that Crass might still need healing. Crass focused and mentally decided. He needed to cut off the attacker's limb as soon as possible. It seemed strange to fight those who looked like ordinary people, but he reminded himself that these creatures had long ceased to be human and struck with icy determination, finishing the attack with a short phrase. Meanwhile, Layla felt that these opponents were behaving differently. These were no longer just zombies. Loro agreed and added that most likely they were revenants. Lapis, clutching the sword in her hands, addressed Roran and handed him the weapon she had specially brought, offering to join the fight. Roran glanced at the situation and replied that it seemed everything was under control and his help was not needed right now. Lapis, trying to lift the sword, complained that it was too heavy and admitted that only Roran could handle such a weapon. Roran looked at her and said it was not worth straining so much, adding that his participation in the fight was really not needed at the moment. Looking at Cross, he thought, this man is one of those for whom help only gets in the way, and that is the sign of an iron rank adventurer. Then he shifted the conversation to revenants and asked with interest what was known about them. Lapis explained that a revenant is a much more dangerous type of undead than zombies or ordinary humans. The name comes from the word, the one who returned. They arise for the same reasons as zombies, a strong attachment to the world of the living, caused either by the will of higher undead or the action of living magic. These creatures are more dangerous than zombies but still not stronger than a living person over time. As the body decays, their power fades. However, if a revenant is fueled by higher undead or supported by magic, it not only retains fragments of its mind, but can surpass the abilities it had in life. She briefly summarized, revenants are much more dangerous than zombies, and when there are many of them, can pose a serious threat even to iron rank adventurers. Lauren, reflecting on what he had heard, stood stunned. He thought that if this was really so, it was unclear how more than a dozen such creatures could be found right in the middle of the road. since there were neither cemeteries nor signs of battle here. This led him to think that stronger dead might be hiding somewhere nearby, and when it came to such strong dead, everything was no less confusing and complicated than with living people. Of those stronger dead he knew, only vampires came to mind. The revenants themselves were not what one should worry about first and foremost. Bros asked what he meant. Lauren said that he had seen one of the creatures bite an adventurer. Rose explained that the bite was not deep thanks to his protective gear, but shards of teeth still got stuck in his hand. He added that there was still one enemy left. Crass looked at him and lightly rushed forward. The guys, seeing this, gasped in surprise and asked what had just happened. Press, having finished the fight, calmly said that it was all over. Angie indignantly asked him again what he meant by those words. Layla, irritably, said that Cress had decided to show off again. Angie called him a complete idiot to herself, and Layla reminded that she had asked not to use this ability on trifles, especially without permission. Praz disagreed with their reproaches, claiming that there was nothing wrong with it, and Luru, trying to restrain him, reminded that they did not know who might be watching their actions, and it was not worth revealing their abilities unnecessarily. Angie called him a fool again, reminding him that he had won even without it. Cress wanted to say something but remained silent. Rose, confused, wondered aloud why Cress suddenly flared up and disappeared like lightning. He added that he could not help but notice it, and Roar admitted that, well, he noticed. He mentally noted that if it had been his first encounter with such an attack, he probably would not have been able to repel it. Cross's speed was impressive, and the force of the blow was such that it cut the revenant in half. Roran asked aloud again what it could really have been. Lapis understood what he meant and addressed Bros. Bros inquisitively asked if she knew what kind of ability it was. Lapis nodded in response and explained that as a servant of the god of knowledge, she knew it was most likely a technique called enhancement. Bros asked if it was magic, and Lapis explained. Although enhancement resembles support magic, it is different. Support magic temporarily increases abilities, while enhancement is an innate gift that strengthens the bearer and the objects or creatures it is applied to. Bros admitted that it sounded very convenient. Lapis added that it was a very rare gift, and those who possessed it often became what people called brave and heroic. Roar thoughtfully tried to understand the difference between a brave person and a hero. Lapis understood. Cress was most likely associated with the Adventurers Guild and possibly under government surveillance. He quietly growled to himself and added that such a gift perfectly suited this self-absorbed dandy, and that he did not care because when this matter was over, they probably would not cross paths again. Lapis asked in surprise what he was going to do, and Roran, calmly looking ahead, replied that nothing too dramatic would happen for now, but they needed to take care of the bodies leaving them as they would be barbaric. Lapis agreed and admitted that Roran was right. Tension among the adventurers grew and turned into panic. One of them said aloud what many thought probably. It was time to return to Kaffa. Something was wrong with this mission. People were dying as if for no reason, as if by snapping fingers. The dead attacked during the day, and the whole situation was eerily disturbing. In his opinion, the task had become too strange probably. That was why the messengers from previous guilds had disappeared. He advised not to flee, but to return to the guild, gather, and reconsider everything once more, reminding that it seemed everyone had previously agreed to continue this task. To this, another adventurer replied that the decision had been made even before the arrival of those very returnees. Now everything had changed, and the penalties for refusing the mission seemed nothing compared to the real threat. With pain in his voice, he recalled how many comrades they had already lost and asked if anyone would compensate them for these losses. Bros, trying to maintain order, asked everyone to calm down and reminded that everyone had voluntarily agreed to participate in this dangerous affair and understood the possible consequences. According to him, they were now much closer to the city of Hansa than to Takafa, so it was more logical to move forward. He promised that when they arrived, everyone would receive the promised reward, and those who still disagreed could arrange another conversation and hold another vote. One of the adventurers loudly declared that he was not going to retreat at all. He said he had not joined the group to return empty-handed, and even less to become prey for the rebels. He admitted that this mission was the most terrible in his life, and that now he would receive a huge reward, even for those who had already died. In response, someone dryly remarked that brave words were worthless when a person was wounded. He sharply replied that his left hand was intact and he was still in the ranks. Another participant said he also would not return, not so much for the reward, but so that the death of his friends would not be in vain. Bruce summed up if there were no more objections they would move on. Roran, gloomy and thoughtful, expressed his concern. He was especially worried about the origin of the rebels. He had examined their belongings before burial, but found nothing that could give even the slightest clue. They only had ordinary wallets, simple accessories, and other trinkets typical for ordinary people. The guys, hearing this, decided that perhaps these creatures had once been the most ordinary inhabitants of some normal settlement, before turning into the undead. Roran agreed but warned that there was no village or city nearby from which they could have come, and until they figured out where these creatures came from, it was impossible to choose a safe path, so in his opinion, it was worth moving extremely cautiously. One of the adventurers, addressing Croesus, could not contain his admiration. He admitted that now he saw him completely differently, he instantly dealt with the undead, and his presence now instilled confidence in the group's safety. Roran thought sarcastically. In front of him was a typical idiot. Bruce gathered the group's attention and asked if there were any objections when no one answered. He ordered to move on, reminded that only one day remained until the Hansa and everyone needed to be on alert, and he himself, with unexpected surprise, realized that he had practically become the leader of this mission. Roran, with a slight smile, said that it was already a bit late for such confessions. Lapis, noticing his effort, sincerely thanked him for his work. Roran apologized to the wagoner for the delay, and he calmly replied that everything was fine. Rowan mentally admitted to himself that if he had known in advance what he would have to go through, perhaps he would have seriously thought about returning to Kaffa. Suddenly, one of the adventurers screamed he was in shock and refused to believe what was happening. He shouted that he did not want to become food for these creatures, and his voice broke into a moan as the revenants attacked and began tearing him apart. Thus began the second night in the camp. Roran, assessing the situation, said that the matter was not only about caution, the problem was that there were too many enemies. The camp was attacked again by revenants, and finding himself in the very midst of the battle, Crasius shouted that there were too many of them and he could not handle it alone. Roran returned to Lapis and tried to find out if all the enemies were rebels. Lapis, carefully examining the battlefield, replied that most of them were zombies. Roran noticed this, returned to the others and asked them to stay behind, stepped forward, and Sina, looking at him with fear, whispered his name anxiously, but Lapis quickly calmed her, promising that he would be fine. Roran raised his huge sword, and with tired irony thought that it was hard to believe with this blade he would have to cut rotten flesh, but gripping the weapon tighter, he began to smash zombies with strength and precision, cutting a path through the darkness of the second night. Roran, feeling how the weight of the sword became part of his body, looked at his weapon with sincere admiration and admitted that this was, damn it, an amazing sword, as if made just for him. Rose, watching how easily he wielded the huge blade, could not hide her amazement. He exclaimed, noting how simply Roran swung that huge metal monster. Roran, brushing off the praise, remarked that one could get used to it. He inquired about Rose's condition, worried whether he had received any wounds. Rose, gathering his courage, assured that he was fine, but immediately shifted the conversation to the main point: what they should do next, since the undead appeared as if out of nowhere, and it was impossible to explain. Lapis, listening to the conversation, suggested that it was all because they were the only living beings in the area, and Roran picked up her thought and whispered that the dead flocked to them like moths to a flame. He said he did not want to impose a decision, but still asked Bros whether he would go forward or turn back. Bros, as if feeling the weight of responsibility, muttered that he did not consider himself a leader. Rora calmly noted that he himself was not going to take the final decision. Bros, summoning his willpower, confidently said that they must continue the path to Hansa. Everything they had already been through did not give them the right to retreat, and Roar agreed, adding that Hansa was closer than Kaffa, so they had a better chance of survival if they went there. Bros skeptically remarked that it was unlikely the whole city could fall. Roran turned to Lapis, asking for her opinion. Lapis replied that she had no specific objections. With one roar he summed it all up. If there were no other opinions, so be it. He asked if at least one wagon remained suitable for the future journey. Lapis confirmed that they managed to find one survivor, but the trouble was that there was only one free spot. Roaring explained that this was caused by zombies, and Lapis added, "Zombies and revenants do not attack horses, they attack only those who resemble their former living selves." Bros sadly added that the rest of the horses had already been taken. The drivers of the first and third wagons took them and disappeared. He tried to stop them but could not. Roran admitted that in this situation it was inevitable. He declared that he himself would deal with the nearest undead, ordered the guys to harness the remaining horses to the wagon, asked Lapis to take San and prepare to depart, and then asked if the driver of the second carriage was still alive. Santa, with a worried voice, said that she had recently seen him nearby among the trees. They approached, and she pointed to him. Lapis, looking closely, said with pain in her voice that the coachman had already begun to turn into the undead. Roran, gritting his teeth, reproached himself in his thoughts. He knew he was not well himself, but ignored it and sadly thought that now he would not be able to properly see this person off. Bros reported that the cart was ready, but none of the other men knew how to drive it. He himself admitted that he had never done it before. Lapis stepped forward and with a slight smile said that it was time for the priestess of the god of knowledge to intervene, and Bros was impressed and respectfully noted that she was truly a woman of many talents if she also knew how to drive the cart. Lapis smiled and turned to Sana to check if she was comfortable. Sana barely nodded, meaning everything was fine, and then Lapis called Roran to hurry up, saying that everyone was already ready to set off. Roran loudly called the survivors to gather and announced that they would break through to the city of Hansa, bitterly noting that it seemed no one else was left alive besides them. Kras smirked and mockingly said that he never thought that among all the participants, Roran would survive, calling him a little bastard, as if he could not come to terms with it. Roran smiled and noticed that Kras repeated his words as if subconsciously, and smiled to himself, remembering how he himself asked the survivors to gather, and had to admit. A strange coincidence that Kras responded turned out to be an unexpected but pleasant trait. Kras did not waste time. He confirmed that he heard about the intention to move to Hansa and immediately asked Roran if he had any plan of action. Roran calmly but firmly replied that he did not have a clear plan, and if Kras did not like it, let him suggest another way himself. Layla intervened, trying to calm the tension, and said that now was not the time for quarrels, and Laura also supported her and insisted that they needed to stick together, because otherwise they would be exhausted not only physically but also spiritually if they continued to fight among themselves. Lauren, not wanting to waste time, urged everyone who was setting off with them. Only one cart remained, on which they planned to reach Hansa. But at that moment something unexpected happened. He loudly shouted for everyone to lie down, sensing danger. Kras turned around, staring into the fog of horror, and his gaze instantly turned to Angie. Lauren, seeing the creature, held her breath in surprise. Before them stood a monster incredible and terrifying. He asked what kind of creature it was. Lapis instantly assessed the situation and realized that before them was a bone dragon. She added that now not only zombies, but also similar creatures were at large. Angie, looking at how everything was unfolding, scolded herself in her thoughts. She admitted that she had been careless. Although her body was still intact, she realized that she could not allow others to suffer because of her own mistake. She knew that if they delayed, the zombies would fill this place again, and her main goal was to give Kras a chance to survive and break free. Angie, with desperate determination, shouted to Layla and Laura to grab Cross and leave immediately, and Cross, hearing this, was outraged. He could not understand why she was giving such orders. Rose was already urging the others, shouting for them to quickly jump into the cart. They had to leave immediately. But Cross refused. He could not and did not want to leave his girlfriend. He said he would never abandon Angie and would follow her. Layla, realizing the absurdity of what was happening, objected. They could not possibly handle this monster in their current state. There was no chance. Laura begged Cross to think about her life. Roran silently watched their quarrel. Lapis sighed, and with a slight mockery, noted that this was starting to sound like a cliché from harem stories, advised Roran to simply use the power of friendship, because according to the logic of such plots, everything would then be resolved, and then ironically asked what they were going to do. Roran recalled to himself that his first impression of Crassus was by no means positive. There was no sympathy, and somehow he even thought that leaving him behind was a perfectly reasonable option. But at the same time, he knew very well what it feels like to lose loved ones. This feeling was too familiar to him, so he could not just allow such a thing to happen. Lapis, noticing this, said with a gentle smile that this was exactly why she could not hate him. Roran's heart fully agreed with her words. He truly knew what it was like to cling to someone who is leaving. He assessed the situation. The bone dragon could not be defeated, and they were ordinary mercenaries, not heroes or knights from legends, but he understood. If they did not react now, the girl's life would be in danger. Lapis said that bone dragons do not need to eat flesh or blood to survive. They feed on negative emotions, suffering, despair, and sadness, so that was why this dragon did not kill the girl immediately. It slowly sank its fangs into her flesh, sucking out every drop of fear and pain from her. She added that there was no more time. On the count of 3 she would use magic to distract the beast, and at that very moment, Roran had to act. Roran was surprised to realize that he thought Lapis only knew healing spells, and she cheerfully replied that she had recently mastered a new ability and now had something fresh, as if just taken out of a magical oven. Hearing this, Roran nodded and agreed. Lapis focused and began to utter magical words. Her voice was firm. In the name of the master, let the sacred light shine. Kras watched in admiration as energy thickened around her. Laura recognized this spell and confirmed that it only affects evil creatures, including the undead. Lapis firmly pronounced the name of her new power, purification magic. At that moment, Roran stepped forward and struck with his huge sword, as the light merged with the blade, and together they charged into battle. Clenching the sword's hilt, Roran concentrated and mentally ordered himself to destroy the foundation, to break the heart of this monster. At the same moment, Lapis, full of determination, activated the spell and released a deadly lure, letting out a fierce cry filled with pure rage and the desire to finish off the enemy. Without hesitation, Roran turned and ordered him not to slow down, and at the same moment shouted to Lapis to immediately return to the carriage. Lapis replied that she understood, quickly took the wounded with her, and without delay followed after him. Ron held his breath and closely watched the enemy's movements. Noticing that the dragon's legs, which had recently been destroyed, had already recovered, he felt a cold fear perhaps the dragon would chase again. He roared, bent down, and quietly cursed, calling the monster a vile creature. The only thing that comforted him was that the enemy was all bones and probably could not fly. However, a swarm of thoughts raged in his head and gave him no peace. Dragons fly thanks to magic, so wings are probably auxiliary for them, and he tried to understand whether the bone dragon could rise into the sky. Lapis, without taking her eyes off the road, noted that the undead are too primitive to consciously use magic, and probably this dragon did not have such an ability. However, she immediately added that now it no longer mattered the carriage with horses was crawling slowly anyway and they could not speed up. Meanwhile, the monster was gradually approaching, and Cress, worried about Njai's condition, asked to slow down a bit to make it easier for her. She jumped up angry and sharply replied, calling him an idiot. He warned that the slightest delay would inevitably allow the dragon to catch up with them, and eventually everyone would die, and then bitterly added that in that case they would probably be called martyrs, but only posthumously. Roran, as if not noticing the quarrel, asked if there was a tall sanctuary nearby. Loru replied that if anyone was still able to use magic, they must continue to support NG until their strength was completely exhausted. Rose turned to Roran, staring at him tensely to see if he really realized. By entering a fight with such an opponent, they were doomed. He firmly emphasized that without the power of the High Acolyte they had no chance, and could not help but wonder what Roran was even capable of. Roran, without a shadow of fear or the slightest doubt, simply said that they had lost this battle from the very beginning. He had no illusions whatever they did, the outcome was already decided. Crassus, with despair in his voice, reminded them that the nearest sanctuary was on the other side of their path, and Roran, firmly and without any hesitation, said that even if they all died, no one had the right to stray from the road. Their task was to reach the end. Roran gritted his teeth, darkness stretched before him, rain clouds hid the sky, but finally they began to part, and the light of the full moon illuminated the road. He raised his eyes, and the bone dragon was still chasing them. At that moment Roran turned to his companions, and sternly warned that under no circumstances should they slow down. Lapis. She nodded, showing that she understood everything. And suddenly Roran noticed how she skillfully maneuvered around a tree. He froze in amazement, realizing that it was not accidental but deliberate, and remembered that once she had prosthetics instead of eyes. He turned to her and said with surprise that she might really be able to see. Lapis, with a slight but confident smile, replied that she could see, and even more than ever, clearly, distinctly, and unmistakably. Rory felt that the situation was incredibly strange. He wondered why no one else noticed the obvious. The threat was so apparent and even suspicious, so he insisted that everyone be informed about it, and the bone dragon had excellent night vision. Even if it didn't turn out that way, he insisted, trust instincts and intuition. Only they at this critical moment would suggest the best path and clarify what to do next. Lapis, looking at the carriage passengers, made a sudden and sharp decision. With cold irony, she said that maybe they should throw the red-haired foolish boy out of the carriage. Warren immediately understood who she meant and asked if she meant Crass. Lapis smiled and said, could it be anyone else? There is no one like that here, such a naive, inexperienced, red-haired, overgrown child. Crass heard these words, froze, and looked at Lapis confusedly, trying to understand what was happening with Angie. Luru, upset, said she could no longer use healing magic. She could not help Angie now. Crass, with despair in his voice, rushed to his friend and begged her not to die, to hold on and not leave him. Roran, realizing that panic would only worsen the situation, sternly reminded them not to lose their fighting spirit in the middle of the battle. Crass, seeing Roran approaching, shouted, trying to understand what he was going to do. Ravrin looked indifferent to the protests. He calmly said that he saw no point in explaining, and then sharply ordered Crassus to move. Crass, who did not expect this, exclaimed in confusion, not understanding why this happened to him, and did not even manage to say a word. The next second, Lapis sharply threw him forward, right towards the horse. Crass, panicked in flight, realized that if he fell, he would either end up under the wheels of a cart or be trampled by a horse. Upon landing, he shouted and rushed to his comrades, angry and not understanding what they were doing. Lapis, without hesitation, explained that he has a gift, the ability to amplify, and she shouted to him to use it on the horse to speed up the carriage, because if they do not do everything possible now, the dragon will catch up with them, and then it will be the end for everyone. Cress, still not fully understanding, shouted that she suggested resorting to force against a living creature. Lapis, raising her voice, barked that there was no time to argue. Now was not the time to moralize. Action was needed immediately, otherwise the bone dragon would turn everyone into mince. Crass, looking at those who tried to save him, mentally asked himself the only important question: could he allow these people to die? he realized that even if his efforts changed nothing, he could not stand idly by and then activated his ability. The carriage suddenly accelerated. Roran, feeling the powerful jerk, noticed with surprise how quickly they gained speed. Lapis, looking ahead, ordered to speed up. There was no time to relax, they had to travel without stops until dawn, and Roran asked what would change when morning came. Lapis replied that the bone dragon is a type of undead, vulnerable to sunlight. When the sun rises, its power will sharply weaken, and it will no longer be able to continue the chase. This is their chance to escape. Layla sharply turned to Cress and called him as if waiting for confirmation. Bros, still stubborn, reminded about the supreme sanctuary. Senna, whose voice was still trembling, whispered, addressing Lauren and calling him brother. Roran said with a heavy look that despite everything, at least now they had a chance to survive, maybe not the best option, but death was definitely not needed. Roran woke up, breathing heavily, and mentally noted that morning had come. He realized that with great difficulty they had still managed to break away from the pursuers, though not without losses, but the result was positive. Loru, seeing that he had regained consciousness, gently greeted him and ironically remarked that the dragon probably had as many as 9 lives. Lorin looked around and said that Senna had just fallen asleep. Her steady breathing calmed him a little. He mentally wondered how the others were doing, but he was most worried about what was happening with Bros. Layla, who was standing nearby, replied that she could not say for sure. Only a little time had passed since their escape, and with each hour Bros' condition was getting worse. Roran asked if they had tried to treat him. Lilo explained that Luru had indeed tried with all her might to heal the boys, but nothing worked, so she had to let Luru rest a bit. But Angie, her condition also remained critical. Even after the second healing attempt, nothing changed. There were too many wounds and they were too deep, and Layla admitted that she could not even say for sure if Angie was alive. Most likely she looked not like a person, but like a corpse. Roaring thought and concluded. The reason why 2 from their squad were immediately taken out of action was still unknown. Mentally, he noted that fate had not been very kind to them. Lapis approached him cheerfully, noticing that he was already awake, and with a barely noticeable smile, said that this morning was simply incredible, as if mocking recent events. Roran looked at the cart and thought with relief that fortunately the horse was fine. Then his gaze slid along the road. He tried to orient himself and asked how much time was left to Hansa. Lapis said that she probably could not say for sure, but thought, if they had not strayed from the road, then the way to the city should be straight, without forks, and Roran confidently stated that if the route was the same, then everything would be fine. Lapis added that although their journey could not be called an ordinary walk, she sincerely hoped that nothing so terrible would happen ahead. Roran nodded and said he was glad to see that she was okay, reminded her that she mentioned fabrics last night, and asked her to bring as much as possible. Lapis squinted and, mockingly accusing him of lying, joked that maybe some men like being hit by cute and beautiful girls. Roran, however, not giving in to her teasing, confidently said that he did not have such an attraction. Lapis admitted with relief that it was good, otherwise she would have been very embarrassed. Then she addressed him by name and asked if he could lead the horse straight. Roran asked her to move a little so he could sit in front. He admitted that he barely slept all night and was very tired. Lapis made room, handed him the reins, and showed him where it was better to settle. Roran noted to himself that benches designed for 2 were too cramped, so he advised us that if she wanted to rest, it was better to move to the roof of the carriage, where it would be more comfortable for her. Lapis refused, saying that she was quite cozy here. Warren looked at her and smiled to himself. It was not entirely true, but he did not argue anymore. Roran mentally noted that although they had left the danger zone quite quickly, the feeling of safety remained extremely fragile, and he could not say for sure whether they were truly safe now or just postponed the inevitable. At that moment he noticed movement nearby. The sun suddenly shifted. He looked at her in surprise and quietly realized that she had woken up. Her voice was weak and confused. She called him, calling him brother. Meanwhile, something disturbing was happening in the carriage. Everyone inside was clearly feeling unwell. The air thickened, and Lauren could no longer stand it. He shouted sharply, trying to understand what was happening. He was sure it was not a curse, but what was happening was clearly beyond the usual. Senna trembled, turned to him, and asked what they should do now. Rohan bitterly said that no matter what they did, they still could not help. Even healing magic was completely powerless here. They only had to move forward, hoping that sooner or later they would reach the city. Lapis confidently claimed that Hansa was already very close, and Roran, full of doubts, tried to find out what this confidence was based on. Lapis said that once, when her father came here on business, she often walked around Hansa and remembered the local landscapes very well, and now before their eyes was exactly the landscape that, according to her memories, existed before the city appeared. Round sighed with relief. It was the best news in a long time. He hoped this was their chance to survive. Lapis warned him not to be too optimistic. She said she felt something strange. The air seemed to tremble with tension. She said something bad had happened here, and they needed to be ready. If necessary, they would have to fight. He froze with a roar, staring ahead. What appeared before their eyes did not fit his idea of the city at all. What he saw was not normal, and he bitterly said that if this was a city, it was nothing like what they expected. Lapis was just as shocked. She could not understand what had happened, but it was clear. Something was definitely wrong. The city gates stood wide open. There were no guards or passers-by. Around was a deathly silence in the place where life usually bustled. She noticed if the gates had been closed, one might have thought that the entire garrison had gone on a campaign perhaps to drive out the undead from Dragonshire, but all the gates were wide open, and this only heightened the anxiety. Roran, observing what was happening, excitedly said that it was no longer so clear what to do next. Lapis tried to remain calm and thought aloud. Although there was a threat of a zombie invasion, a completely empty city could still have value. She said hopefully that they would manage to replenish supplies and give everyone at least a little rest, but immediately added that they have no right to abandon those who are now in a wheelchair and cannot walk on their own. Roran, turning to Senna, looked at her with tenderness and determination. In her actions, he saw the inner core that does not let her retreat even in the hardest times, and promised that he would not let them perish, would overcome this trial at any cost. They entered the city, which was unusually quiet and empty. Lapis immediately noticed that the streets were empty. There was not a single living soul, and there were no signs of a recent battle. He emphasized that there were no destructions or signs of a fierce battle here, and added that none of this looked like the result of an undead attack. Roran noticed a strange detail. Despite the complete absence of people, the city itself looked as if someone was still taking care of it. He openly shared his feelings and admitted that it was becoming increasingly anxious, and then, in an involuntary impulse and to lighten the situation, added that two travelers left alone in an empty, quiet city is a very romantic picture, and suggested that it might even be a pleasant circumstance. Roaring was not at all enthusiastic and answered without enthusiasm. Lapis, understanding that it was inappropriate in this situation, admitted that she was joking and laughed. Rowan turned his gaze aside and pointed at it, waiting for explanations. Lapis glanced at the cross and suggested that it might need to be lowered, but quickly added that she did not want to touch it at all. Rorar agreed with this reluctance and added that he himself, if possible, would try to avoid contact. Lapis, whose voice carried a hint of regret, said she felt sorry for the horse apparently. It had gotten into trouble, and Ron reminded that there were 4 people in their carriage barely holding on to life, suggesting to postpone this for later. First, find a hospital. Lapis instantly agreed and immediately asked Sena if she knew where a hospital might be in the city. After a short pause, Sena confidently pointed in the direction she thought they should go. Accepting her direction, Lapis suggested the whole group move in the right direction. Roran took the reins and said he could only drive straight, so he handed the control to Lapis, who thanked him for the temporary substitution and said it was helpful. When they approached the building, Roran cast a doubtful glance at it and said it seemed too small for a city hospital, and Sena asked in surprise, not understanding what the matter was. Lapis explained that it was not a city hospital, and with slight surprise, noted that even the daughter of the ruler of the Hands knew about this small clinic, so she decided that Sena's father had probably brought her here to his trusted private doctor. Santa confirmed that the doctor was indeed an outstanding specialist and said that her father always brought her here. Hearing this, Lauren remarked, in her opinion, the mayor had chosen a private doctor to treat his daughter instead of a public clinic, and this surprised her greatly. Lapis suggested that perhaps now it was even safer she did not want to venture into public places until she had a full picture of what was happening in the city. Lauren, noticing her fatigue, wanted to know why she suspected this. Lapis replied that she could not say anything for sure yet, and asked Roran to pull the injured out of the carriage, then turned to their companion with a request to help. Press barely lifted his head and said he needed to rest a little because they had managed to escape from the dragon, mostly thanks to his actions. Lapis coldly reminded him who exactly saved Angie from the dragon and firmly stated that it was Mr. Roran. Press, feeling this, reluctantly acknowledged Lauren's merits and, though uncertainly, thanked him. Roran noticed that the rescue was not yet complete and said that instead of talking, the injured should be immediately moved into the clinic building. Cross, having come to his senses a bit, agreed and immediately said he was ready to get to work. Roran, recalling recent events, said that at night his priestess mercilessly whipped the crosses, and he did not even show obvious displeasure. Press reacted with obvious surprise. No one understood what was meant. Roran suggested that perhaps Crassus simply enjoys this. Crassus exclaimed that this was not true at all and assured that he was an ordinary person. Roran, remaining calm, noted that in that case, a normal reaction would be to ask the priestess to stop. Lapis intervened and said that Kraz would have come to his senses even without such a push. Roran smiled and replied that it was not about the method, he just found the whole situation funny. Roran reported that everything was finished. Lapis asked if everyone had been brought down, and Roran confirmed the work was done, and supplies remained in the carts. Although there were few, among the things there was food, and this became a real salvation in their situation. Lapis sighed with relief and shared another good news. Although it was a private clinic, it had a fairly wide stock of medicines useful for their current needs. Press reminded Lapis that she was a priestess and asked if she had any medical knowledge. Lapis agreed that she understood medicine a little and confidently said that Laura also had some training in this field. Press explained that Laura was actually well versed in legal matters, and Angie was the real medic in their group, adding that it was Angie who needed help now, and honestly admitted that he himself would not cope, after which he sincerely thanked Lapis for her help. Looking around, Lapis realized that she could probably help the injured recover, and decided to start with one patient. Rowan insisted that she hurry. It would be shameful to travel all this way, and lose someone right at the doorstep of salvation. Lapis said that the men should leave the room during treatment because she needed to start medical procedures. He managed to do at least a little useful during this time. Crass indignantly asked if she was really asking him to leave because the victims were his friends. Lapis calmly explained that she was about to start a procedure during which 3 girls would have to undress, and noted that Crazes would hardly want to see this. She asked if he really wanted to look at the girls' naked bodies. Crass became embarrassed and began to justify himself, saying that it was not like that at all. Lapis continued, adding that she might even have to undress Mr. Bros, and sarcastically remarked as if looking at naked middle-aged men was some kind of refined hobby of Crass. Cross was stunned by this suggestion and barely uttered that he had said nothing of the sort, and Lapis waved her hand. Shut up, don't distract them from preparations. Roran also decided to step aside and said something, and Lapis, addressing him gratefully, suggested inspecting the surroundings together with Sina, doubting whether it was worth entrusting this to Crass. She added that he would also think that taking care of Sina was a bad idea, and insisted that the girl would be safer next to Roran. Roran asked if Lapis wanted Sina to stay in the house. Lapis calmly reminded her that during treatment patients would have to undress and not only women, and added that naked Mr. Bros could psychologically traumatize Sina. Roran, hearing this, exclaimed in surprise that undressing should be to complete nudity. Lapis explained that in their situation, nothing terrible would happen if the men just walked around the perimeter. She reminded that Senna was local and probably well-oriented in the area, so this could come in handy. Lauren agreed with her arguments and admitted that she was right, and Lapis asked if she could count on him. Roran promised to return as soon as he felt the situation became dangerous. Lapis wished them luck and added hopefully that she would wait for their return. Senna quietly said she was going with Roran. Lapis, left alone with the task, thought with slight tension about where to start, and Cress, despite his clumsiness, encouraged her and asked her to begin. Lauren, approaching the exit, suggested that Santa go. Santa modestly confirmed her readiness, called him brother, and joined him. Rowan fixed his gaze on the street, which apparently was once a market. The vegetables in the stalls had dried and spoiled, but had not yet rotted, so everything had happened very recently. All the shops were intact. There was no trace of fighting, destruction, or disorder anywhere. Some houses even had uneaten food, as if people had left everything and hurried away, and despite this, no sign of an attack was found. Sen, looking around, only stared in surprise at what had happened to the city's inhabitants. She was worried about where they could have disappeared to. Roran loudly reasoned that if the townspeople had really fled the city in panic or evacuated en masse, they would hardly have left their personal belongings and food behind. He noted that all the valuables and household items remained untouched, as if people had suddenly vanished without taking anything with them. After that, he asked Senna if she knew how many people usually lived in the city. Senna was confused and admitted that she could not name the exact number, and Roran mentally estimated. Judging by the size of the city and the scale of the buildings, there must have been from 30 to 50,000 people living here. He looked around and wondered if these people had disappeared as if melted into the air like smoke. It seemed incredible, but he decided that as soon as he returned to Kaifa, he would definitely tell the Adventurers Guild about it, although he doubted anyone would believe him. He added that people do not disappear just like that, without a trace. In any case, there should have been at least drops of blood, bodies, or some other signs of what happened. Sina quietly whispered, "Brother." Roran realized he had become too agitated and apologized. She replied that everything was fine, but admitted that she was also increasingly worried, especially because there was no news about her father and other villagers. Roran's thoughts returned again to the assumption. If his parents and other townspeople were still alive, then most likely they had hidden in the castle, or in the main residence that stood in the very heart of the city. He noticed that Hansa was surrounded by walls, but it still seemed as if the fortifications were not intended for battles inside the city. The main street leading to the residence could be passed without any obstacles. He admitted to himself, if there was a chance, he would gladly inspect the castle soon, but he also realized that out of 7 people nearby, only 3 could act, and this created a dangerous situation. He decided it was safer to wait until the other 4 recovered before launching a full-scale operation, but he was still not sure if he would make it in time. Senna noticed his watchful gaze and asked what had happened. Roran felt as if someone was watching him, reported that someone was nearby, and suggested that it could be either a person or a monster. Sena pointed to the side and said she had noticed movement. Lauren stopped her and spoke loudly. He introduced himself as an adventurer who arrived in Hansa with an important mission, explained that he is currently trying to figure out what is happening, and then addressed the stranger demanding to know who she is and what happened in the city. The girl, looking exhausted and frightened, said that she needed help. Lauren asked if she was a local. The girl nodded and confirmed where she was from. He said calmly but firmly that he wanted to know exactly what happened here, where all the inhabitants disappeared to, and why she was left alone. The girl explained that a few days ago, everyone started behaving strangely. She was scared of what was happening and hid in the basement, but the food supplies ran out and she had to go outside. Roran asked if she had a family, and the girl replied that her parents had died and she was completely alone. Then he asked another important question, if there was anyone in the city she knew or had seen. The girl admitted that she did not know, but then looked at Sena in surprise and asked if she was the master's daughter. Roran did not deny it and admitted that it was quite possible that Sena really was his daughter. The girl enthusiastically said that the main inhabitants of the place they seemed to be going to should be safe according to her. There were soldiers standing there and a protective fence around. Roran realized to himself that his guess was correct and accepted that this was probably the only reasonable option. He decided that he definitely had to discuss this with Lapis, after which he returned to the girl and asked what she would do next. The girl anxiously asked to be taken with them. She said that she could not get to the master's residence on her own. As a citizen of Kanza, she willingly declared that she was ready to serve the family of the head and promised to take care of them. She introduced herself as Saudal and sincerely asked for permission to join. A polite thank you was heard. Cress, observing what was happening, dryly noted that so they had found a survivor, and politely invited her inside, while Roran mentally noted that Cress remained vigilant, as he was ordered his actions showed honesty and responsibility. At first Ruin considered Krasus a narcissistic fool, but now he had to admit that he was not so bad. Perhaps his previous behavior was a consequence of the sick environment he got into. Lapis warmly greeted Roran, rejoiced at his return. He asked how the treatment went. Lapis replied that the treatment was over, but she could not come in yet. Then she turned her gaze with interest to his new companion and noticed that they had not returned empty-handed. Roran explained that Sudal was a survivor they found in the city, and unfortunately, she was the only one they managed to find, so he suggested that while the sun was still high, it was time to start preparing and head to the residence, as now was the best time. Lapis nodded a sensible proposal and added that 3 patients who had suffered in some unclear way were gradually recovering and would soon be on their feet. But when the topic turned to Enji, she warned things were much more complicated there. Due to the injuries received, her internal organs had bleeding and compression, so she was in serious condition. According to Lapis, under no circumstances should Enji be moved in such a state. Roran, in an anxious tone, asked how much time would be needed for recovery. Lapa replied that at least today she needed to rest. Tomorrow, probably, Laura would come to her senses and use her healing spells. By the end of tomorrow, Enji could already be carefully moved. Roran admitted that haste could cost Enji her life, so he suggested leaving Crows with her, while they and the rest set off for the residence. Lapis, hearing how Lauren was thinking about leaving part of the group and moving on without Ange, felt that such a proposal sounded cold and merciless. Lauren ironically reminded her that it was she, a person with a priestly past, who accused him of callousness. After a short pause, Lapis focused and turned the conversation back to the main point, asked how they would act in this situation, and Roran suggested spending the night here and setting off only when everyone in the group had sufficiently recovered to travel without risking their lives. Lapis clearly nodded and said she was already starting to prepare everything for the overnight party so that everyone would feel comfortable and be safe. Sudal, standing nearby, immediately sincerely offered help and took on organizing the lodging. Lapis politely but firmly refused her help, after which she addressed Sen and Saudal with a request to keep the rest separate until morning, each in their own room. Sudal, embarrassed and a little worried, asked why she was not at least allowed to take care of it, while Senator Lapis remained calm and explained that if Sudal really wanted to work with the group, she had to follow orders without asking questions. She sternly warned that if she objected or refused to follow instructions, Sudal would no longer be able to remain in their group. Sudal was stunned by the sharp warning, but silently did not object. Santa, a little worried, called Sudal, as if hoping that everything would become clear. Lauren, feeling the tension, rushed to intervene. Lapis felt that perhaps she had spoken too harshly and immediately apologized. She explained that such a manner of speaking remained from the strict training in the years when she was a young priestess. But she insisted that Saudal fulfill her request and follow the instructions, adding that it would not take much effort and was quite within her power. In the end, they realized that arguing was pointless and obediently agreed. Lapis took the initiative. She invited Saudal to go with her to the room assigned to her and at the same time called Sina to join. Sina, clearly unwilling to part with her brother, turned to Roran and shyly asked if she could stay with him, but Lapis firmly said that it was impossible. Warren, sitting down next to the girl, gently explained that he himself did not fully understand what was happening now, but firmly believed that it would be safer for her to stay inside the building than to be outside. He added that the premises were guarded by a reliable and kind guy, and then promised that tomorrow they would definitely go look for her parents. Sina, listening to his words, agreed and nodded. Meanwhile, a worry flashed through Roran's mind, and he quietly hoped that everything would really end well, and his expectations, despite all the oddities, would prove to be correct.